A construction worker from Incheon opened his eyes to find himself in a strange place, and the first thing he saw wasn't 5 terrified brides. He saw a rotten beam overhead that would collapse in a year, because for 12 years he had been patching up things that were falling apart, and now everything was falling apart, including the 5 women bound to him by glowing threads. The cold hits his face before his vision returns. His back is wet. Water drips from above his head so rhythmically that he can count the seconds. Jang Doyeon lies in a stranger's body, and this body aches as if it had been simmering over a low flame for 8 days. Stranger's hands, stranger's scars, 3 scars across his left forearm. He opens his eyes and sees blackened beams. One is sagging. Another year and it will collapse on someone's head. That is what he notices first. Not the altar, not the extinguished candles, the beam, because his eyes are fixed on the cracks. Someone is shaking his shoulder. An old woman, a face like a baked apple, eyes sharp with fear. She screams that the groom has woken up and the ceremony must be finished now or everything is lost. He doesn't understand. The groom, the ceremony, the clan, 5 brides. The words scatter. Juhan stands up. His legs won't hold him. He grabs the wall and the mortar crumbles beneath his fingers. A crack from the floor to the middle, 70 centimeters. He notes it mechanically. Then he turns to the people. 5 girls, each stands as if ready to bolt for the exit. The first presses a hand wrapped in dirty cloth to her chest. The second, thin as a pole with a bow on her back, looks at him as if he were a dog that might bite. The third gives a hollow smile. The fourth stands frozen in men's armor 2 sizes too big and doesn't blink. The fifth smiles warmly, but her eyes are empty, like the window of a closed store. And here's the strangest part. Doyeon looks at them and doesn't see brides. He sees 5 people who've been backed into a corner. He knows that look. He saw it on the residents' faces when he came after the typhoon and said the house could still be saved, but they didn't believe him. The old woman shouts a name. Lee Ju-han. That's the name of this body. Fine. He'll be Ju-han. Details later. Right now there are 6 people in a crumbling building and not a single tool. A familiar situation. He's done this hundreds of times. Yuhan straightens up through the pain. He learned to work through pain back on his second construction site when he fell from the scaffolding and finished his shift with a cracked rib. He turns to the girl with the broken arm. She flinches. He freezes. He doesn't approach. He speaks calmly. Show me your arm. The girl doesn't move. The old woman falls silent for the first time. The room is quiet. Only the dripping water can be heard. Yuhan stands with his palm open and waits. He doesn't press her. He doesn't repeat himself. He's in no hurry. The house isn't going anywhere. The girl takes a step, then another. She holds out her hand. The bandage is brown with old blood. The bone is healed crookedly. You can tell without any medical training. Her name is Park Nari. He'll find that out later. Right now, he's holding a stranger's broken hand and thinking that the bone can be set if he finds 2 smooth pieces of wood. Then he'll finish the wedding. Then he'll figure out where he is and why. But first, the arm. Always first, whatever hurts right now. The ceremony will end in an hour. Yuhan repeats the old woman's words. He bows to the altar. He bows to each of the 5. Slowly, separately, just as he used to bow to clients. Not from the bottom up, as equals. The 4 watch in bewilderment. The archer by the door isn't looking at all. Nari cradles the hand that now bears a crooked splint made of 2 planks from the altar shelf. The splint holds. The old woman's name is Lee Gyung-hee, 78 years old. She is the only one crying, silently. She wipes her eyes with one hand. With the other, she clutches the clan's seal, a round stone the size of a fist. When Juhan touched it, the stone flashed and went out. Gyung-hee made this confession. Juhan thought it was a short circuit, but he said nothing. He walks around the building, the ancestral hall, 6 by 12 meters. A third of the roof tiles are missing. The east wall is cracked. The north wall is propped up by a rotting log. The second floor is uninhabitable. A beam has sagged. The staircase is wobbly. There is a well, but the rope has rotted. The fence is knocked down. The road is washed out. In Incheon, he would have written it in his report. Demolition is recommended, but there is nowhere to demolish it. 7 people live here, and it is winter outside. He returns. 5 women sit in the corners like cats locked in a single room. The hearth is cold. There is no firewood. Yuhan sits in the middle and thinks. He is 22 in this body and 31 in his head. No money. No food except a sack of millet. No tools except a dull axe. 6 women depend on him, and not a single one believes him. There is winter outside the walls, and there are hands. 2 of them. Workers. He stands up, walks to the east wall, taps it with his knuckles. Hollow on the outside, empty on the inside. Backfill between the layers of masonry, straw and clay. He picks at the mortar. It crumbles. He removes a piece of the inner layer. Behind it is dry, yellow-gray dust. 200 years ago, it was insulation. Now it's a combustible mass. He takes a handful, brings it to his nose. Dry. No mold. He asks Gyung-hee for flint. A spark. The dust flares up. It burns evenly. Hot. Almost smokeless. Juhan turns toward the hall. 5 pairs of eyes are fixed on him. It will be warm soon. In 2 hours, he has exposed a 1.5-meter section of the inner layer of the east wall. He shovels the dust into sacks. There aren't enough sacks. Ara silently brings her travel bag. Then Riel brings hers. No one asked. By evening, the stove is burning. Grandma Gyung-hee is breathing. The women hold their hands out toward the fire. Juhan counts. The tinder will last 8 days if used sparingly. In 8 days, they need to find firewood, repair the roof, get food, and figure out what these threads are. Thin, glowing lines stretch from his chest to each of the 5. To Nari, it's dull, almost gray. To Ara, with a red tint. To Seha, a cold blue. Toward Riel, it is taut as a string. Toward Miyu, it flickers and cannot settle on a color. He doesn't know what it means, but he is a builder. He knows how to read blueprints. And these threads look like a building plan where everything has sagged and nothing is bearing the load. Gyung-hee coughs in her sleep. Nari sits closest to the fire. Juhan closes his eyes. Tomorrow he'll start with the roof. Always start with the roof. If the roof leaks, everything else is pointless. The morning began with Juhan nearly dying. He climbed onto the roof before dawn. A tile cracked under his foot, and his leg sank in up to the knee. He hung from a rafter with one hand. Below, the stone floor ancestors. 4 meters. If he fell on his back, it would be a spinal fracture. He pulled himself up. He made it out. He sat on the ridge beam and caught his breath. Lee Juhan's body turned out to be stronger than he thought. The 3 scars on his forearm weren't just decorations. This guy was a creature hunter. His muscles were sinewy and tenacious. His hands were used to grabbing whatever they could find. That's good. That can be put to use. The roof. He examined it thoroughly as the sun rose. A third of the tiles were missing. The rafters were generally sturdy. The wood was old but dry. The problem wasn't the structure, but the covering. He needed tiles, or at least something that wouldn't let water through. There are no tiles. There's no money for tiles. He climbed down and went to inspect the outbuildings. The one without a roof. The walls are stone, sturdy, but the roof has collapsed inward, and the tiles lie in a heap on the floor. Half are broken, half are intact. He counts. 47 whole tiles. The roof of the ancestral hall needs at least 80, but if he just covers the living area above the first floor where they sleep, 40 will be enough. 7 to spare. He starts hauling them. On his 5th trip, Riel appears in the doorway, in armor, at 6 in the morning. She says she saw him climb onto the roof. Juhan nods. Riel stands there, silent. Then she takes 2 roof tiles and carries them, without asking, without smiling. She just carries them. By noon, all the intact tiles have been moved. Juhan is back on the roof. Now he has to remove the broken ones and lay the intact ones. The work is monotonous. He did this 100 times in Incheon after typhoons. His hands remember. Different hands, but the same movements are the same. Remove, clean the groove, lay it down, press it in, check. Next one. Riel stands below and hands them over, silently. Ara went out at dawn with a bow and went into the forest. She returned at lunchtime with 2 hares. She placed them by the threshold. She didn't say a word. She went back. Juhan looked at the hares and thought that this was his first meal in 2 days besides the thin millet porridge. Then he thought that Ara hadn't brought the hares for him. She brought them because that's all she knows how to do. It's her way of not feeling useless. He understands that. At the construction site, there were guys who stayed behind after their shift to sort through the tools. Not because they had to, because their hands had to be busy. Otherwise, their minds would start thinking. Nari cooked up a stew with one hand, her left hand, her right was in a cast. She moved around the kitchen so slowly and carefully, as if every movement caused her pain. That was probably the case. Juhan watched out of the corner of his eye while he laid the roof tiles. The thread connecting him to Nari had changed slightly. It hadn't become brighter, but the color had shifted from gray to pale green. He didn't know what that meant, but green was better than gray. He could feel that. They were all sitting together at the table for the first time. Not by choice. There was just one dining room and one set of bowls. Kyung-hee ate greedily and quickly, like someone who wasn't sure they'd be fed tomorrow. Seha ate neatly. She didn't look up once. Miu ate with a smile and said the soup was wonderful. Nari lowered her head. Juhan saw a thread leading to Miu. The flickering grew more frequent, as if something inside was working itself to the bone. A smile. That was what was working itself to the bone. Miu smiled non-stop, and it cost her strength she didn't have. After lunch, Juhan took charcoal from the stove. He found a more or less flat wall. He began to draw. It was a plan of the estate, a bird's-eye view, just like he used to do at construction sites before work began. The ancestral hall, 3 outbuildings, a well, a fence, a road. He drew and spoke aloud. Here the wall has cracked. We need to patch it before the frost sets in. Here the roof is ready. Here we need doors. Here the well has no rope. You can plant a vegetable garden here in the spring if you clear it out. Kyung-hee walked over and stood beside him. She looked at it for a long time. Then she asked how he knew what the yard looked like. After all, he'd been bedridden with a fever for 8 days. Juhan replied that he'd seen it when he walked around in the morning. Kyung-hee looked at him with that same gaze, a sharp one. She didn't believe him, but she said nothing. Seha came over too. She stood 3 paces away, her arms crossed. She was looking at the drawing, and Juhan noticed how her eyes moved along the lines. She was calculating. Proportions, distances. She was checking his calculations. An alchemist. Of course she's calculating. Juhan poked with a piece of charcoal at an empty square next to the kitchen and said that an herb dryer could be built here, if anyone needs an herb dryer. Seha didn't say anything, but she didn't leave. That's something. In the evening, Juhan sat by the wall and thought. 5 threads, each one dull. A system. He doesn't know how it works, but he feels that the threads aren't just an indicator. They're a connection, a real one. And it responds to something, not to force, not to a command, to something else. In the morning, he woke up and knew how to tie knots correctly for roofing work in high humidity. He had never studied this, neither in this life nor in the last. The knowledge was simply there, as if someone had slipped a page from a textbook into his head during the night. He remembered how yesterday Rie had handed him roof tiles, precisely and rhythmically, like someone used to working with heavy loads. She's a knight. She knows about joints and fasteners, growth transfer. He hasn't named it that yet, but he realized that when someone in his family does something well, he gets a piece of the knowledge he needs. Family. A strange word for 7 strangers in ruins, but that's exactly how the system sees it. The second day is over. The roof over the living quarters is closed. There's stew. There's a plan on the wall. There's one woman who handed him roof tiles without asking. One who brought food without saying a word. One who looked at his drawing and didn't leave. 2 who are silent for now. And 1 old woman who sees too much. Juhan lay down to sleep on the floor by the wall. He placed a blunt axe next to him, not because of enemies, out of habit. On the construction site, he always kept his tools close by, so he wouldn't waste time looking for them in the morning. The 3rd day will begin in the morning. He'll work on the well. The well turned out to be deeper than Juhan thought, 12 meters. The walls are lined with stone, and the stone is solid. The problem wasn't the well, but the hoisting mechanism. The rope had rotted. The pulley was cracked along its axis. The bucket was full of holes, 3 breakdowns, and each one had to be fixed separately. He twisted the rope out of strips of bark. It took a long time. It was tedious. He rubbed his fingers raw. But the rope turned out strong. He carved a new pulley from the log that had been propping up the north wall. Instead, he propped up the north wall with 2 thinner logs and a strut. Less reliable, but it would do for now. He patched the bucket with pieces of tin from an old basin he found in the outbuilding. By noon on the 3rd day, the well was working. Miu hauled up the first bucket of water. She insisted on it. She said she wanted to check if it would fall apart. She smiled as she did so, but Juhan saw through it. Miyu wasn't checking the gate. Miyu wanted to be useful. She wanted someone to see that she was working too. The water was clear, cold. Young-hee tasted it first and said it tasted just like before, just like 20 years ago, when the Lee clan was still a clan. Then she fell silent and went into the house. Juhan didn't follow her. There are things that can't be fixed with your hands. After the well, he set to work on the doors. 2 outbuildings without doors meant 2 rooms that couldn't be used in winter. There wasn't much wood. There were almost no tools. The axe was dull. He found a whetstone by the stream behind the estate. He sharpened the axe for 40 minutes. Then he chopped. Then he hewn. The work was rough. In Incheon, people would have laughed at him for such doors. But the doors closed. The doors kept out the wind. That's enough. On the 4th day, a man from a neighboring village arrived. A short man with shifty eyes. He introduced himself as the village head of Paeksan. He said he'd heard about the wedding in the Lee clan. He laughed, without holding back. 5 wives and not a single tale. Then he said that the village of Pyeongchon owed Paeksan for water from the shared stream. 3 sacks of grain. Juhan asked since when the water in the stream belonged to Paeksan. The village head said since the Lee clan ceased to be a clan. Juhan looked at him, calmly, without malice, without fear, with the same look he'd given the contractors who'd tried to foist rotten rebar on him at the price of new. He said he wouldn't take water from the stream, he had his own well, and that he owed the 3 sacks of grain only to whoever showed him a document with a seal. The village head flushed. He promised the Lee clan would regret it. He left. Miyu stood behind the door and heard everything. When the village head left, she came out. There was no smile. For the first time in 3 days, there was a genuine expression on her face. Anxiety. She said that the village head of Paeksan was connected to the northern clans, that he collects tribute for the Ok clan, that if Juhan refused him, word would reach the Ok clan within a week. Juhan nodded. He asked how she knew that. Miyu replied that she was a merchant. She knows who pays whom within a 50 li radius. This was the first time Miyu had said something without a smile and without calculation. Just a fact. Straightforward. The thread to Miyu had changed. The flickering slowed. It became smoother. Just a little. Juhan said he needed a map. Who's who here? Who owes whom? Who trades in what? Miyu looked at him for a long time. Then she said she would draw one. On the 5th day, Juhan set to work on the stove. The old stove in the ancestral hall had been built properly, but 50 years ago. The draft was weak. Half the heat was escaping into the wall instead of the room. He took apart the top part of the chimney, redirected the flue, rebuilt it with the same stones but at a different angle. The work took all day. By evening, the stove was burning so well that the hall became hot. For the first time in who knows how many years, Kyung-hee sat by the stove and warmed her hands. She wasn't coughing. She was breathing evenly. Seha walked into the room. She stood by the wall. She looked at the stove, then at Juhan, then at the stove. She asked how he had changed the draft. Juhan explained. The angle of the chimney, the cross-section of the flue. If the flue narrows in the right place, the air accelerates and pulls harder. Seha listened. Her expression didn't change, but she listened until the end. She didn't interrupt. She didn't leave. Then she said it was the same principle as in a distillation apparatus. Juhan didn't know what a distillation apparatus was in this world, but he understood that Seha had just drawn a parallel between his work and hers. It was a bridge, a small one, a shaky one, but a bridge. On the 6th day, he woke up and knew how to properly dry medicinal herbs in conditions of high humidity and low temperature. The knowledge came during the night. Clear, specific, drying temperature, time, storage method. He remembered that yesterday, Nari had been sorting through her herbs all day, with her left hand, slowly and painstakingly, sorting them according to criteria only she understood. She was doing her work. The transfer had worked. Juhan found Nari in the pantry. She was sitting on the floor amid bundles of dried herbs and looked as if she hadn't slept all night. He sat down beside her, said he wanted to build a drying shed, asked where would be the best place to put it. Nari looked up. For the first time, she looked straight at him, not at the floor, not to the side, straight on. She said by the south wall. The sun shines there from morning until noon, and the wind doesn't blow through. Juhan nodded. He stood up. He walked over to the south wall. He began clearing the space. Nari remained seated. But 10 minutes later, she came out. She stood next to him. With her left hand, she pointed out exactly where to place the posts. The thread leading to her grew slightly brighter, just a little, like a light bulb with a slightly higher voltage. By evening on the 6th day, the frame of the drying rack stood against the south wall, rough, a bit crooked, but functional. Nari hung up the first bundles of herbs and stood there for a long time. Then she quietly said that her family used to have a drying rack 3 times this size. Then she fell silent. Juhan didn't say he'd build a bigger one. He didn't try to comfort her. He said he'd finish the shelves tomorrow. Nari nodded and left. A week passed. The roof doesn't leak. The well works. The stove heats the room. The doors close. A plan of the courtyard hangs on the wall, and next to it is a map of Miyu. Trade routes, clans, connections, debts. Juhan looked at the map and didn't see politics. He saw logistics. Who supplies what, where things are brought from, where the bottlenecks were. The builder in him looked at the map of the continent as if it were a master plan for development. In the evening, he sat by the stove. Kyung-hee sat next to him. They were silent. Then the old woman said one thing. She said that the real Lee Juhan was afraid of heights as a child. Juhan remained silent. Kyung-hee said that this morning she had how he sat on the roof ridge, dangling his legs, eating porridge. 4 meters up, like a man who had spent his whole life on rooftops. Juhan said nothing. Kyung-hee looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Whoever you are, boy, you fixed my roof. That's enough." She stood up, went to bed. Juhan sat by the stove and watched the fire. They'd figured him out. On the 7th day, a 78-year-old woman. He closed his eyes. Threads flickered in the darkness. 5 faint lines, each slightly brighter than a week ago. Just a little. That's not enough yet, but it's a start. The 2nd week began with a frost. Overnight, the temperature dropped so much that the water in the bucket by the threshold was covered with a crust of ice as thick as a finger. The dust from the wall was running out. 3 more days, and there would be nothing left to burn. Juhan went out into the yard before dawn and looked at the forest behind the estate. The forest was dense. The trees were old. There was enough firewood in it for 10 winters, but Juhan had only one dull axe and a body that had been working non-stop for a week. He went into the forest. An hour later, he found a tree felled by a storm, dry, thick, perfect, but it needed to be sawed and dragged away. He had no saw. He began chopping with the axe. On the 3rd swing, a sound came from behind him. He turned around. Riel, without armor, in a simple shirt, with her father's sword. She walked over, looked at the tree, looked at the axe, said it would be faster with a sword. Juhan wanted to object that a battle sword wasn't a tool for chopping wood. Then he looked at Riel, at her face. She wasn't offering to help. She was asking for permission to be useful, just like with the roof tiles, only now she had taken off her armor. He nodded. Riel chopped the tree with her sword for 2 hours. Precise strikes, even, not a single wasted movement. The knight's sword cut through the wood like butter. Chi. He saw it up close for the first time, a faint glow around the blade, the force of the blow. Riel was strong, truly strong, and she was wasting that strength on firewood, because the family needed firewood. By noon, a mountain of logs lay in the yard, enough for a month. Riel stood there, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. The sword in her hand was trembling. Juhan approached. He said thank you. Then he said he could see how the armor was rubbing her shoulders raw. Yesterday morning he'd noticed red streaks on her neck as she left the house. The armor was too big. The padding inside had worn away. The metal was rubbing against her skin. Riel froze. Then she said it didn't matter. Juhan said it did matter. Armor is a load-bearing structure. If the load-bearing structure isn't tailored to the person wearing it, it maims instead of protecting. Riel looked at him as if he were speaking a language she didn't know, but every word of which was true. He said he would re-stitch the padding. He needed leather and rags. Riel was silent. Then she nodded, once, briefly, and left. The thread connecting to her changed. For the first time, it didn't just grow brighter, it shifted. The tension eased, just a little, as if someone had loosened a guitar string slightly. That afternoon, Yuhan repaired the armor. He removed the inner padding. The old padding had turned into lumps. He cut the new padding from scraps of leather from a saddlebag he'd found in the outbuilding. He adjusted it to fit, not to the size of the armor, but to Riel's size. She stood nearby and turned silently when he asked. When he finished and she put the armor back on, an expression appeared on her face that Yuhan hadn't seen once in 2 weeks. Surprise. The armor fit. It didn't dangle. It didn't chafe. It fit. Riel moved her arms. She crouched. She stood up. She turned around. Then she looked at Yuhan and opened her mouth to say something. She didn't say it. She closed her mouth. She nodded. She turned and walked out into the courtyard. A minute later, the sound of training came from the courtyard. The whistle of a sword. Strikes. She was training for the first time since she'd come to Pyeongchang. Kyung-hee stood by the window and listened. Then she said that the knight had found his scabbard. Yuhan didn't understand. Kyung-hee explained. A knight without a master is like a sword without a scabbard, dangerous to everyone, including himself. When a knight finds someone to serve, the sword stops cutting the hands that hold it. Yuhan thought Kyung-hee was talking about him, about how Riel had recognized him as her master. Then he realized she wasn't. Kyung-hee wasn't talking about him. Kyung-hee was talking about the clan. Riel hadn't found a master. She had found a home in which to sheath her sword. The difference was enormous. By the 3rd week, the real cold had set in. At night, the wind howled so that the walls hummed. Yuhan didn't sleep. He checked the stove. He stoked the fire. He counted the supplies. The millet was running out. The hares Ara brought were enough to feed them, but not to fill them up. They need grain. They need vegetables. They need salt. In the morning, he gathered everyone. For the first time in 2 weeks, he sat on the floor in the middle of the hall. 5 women sat around him, Kyung-hee in the corner. He spoke plainly. There's enough food for 10 days. After that, we'll go hungry. He needs help. Not orders, but a plan. Everyone knows how to do something. He wants to know exactly what. Silence. A long one. Then Miyu spoke, calmly, no smile. She listed everything she knew about the trade routes in the area. The nearest market was a 2-day journey south. There they could trade fur for grain. The exchange rate was 3 hair pelts for a sack of millet. It was more profitable to carry fox fur, but there were few foxes in these woods. Ara said there were foxes. On the western slope, she'd seen tracks. Seha said she could make a lure out of herbs, a scent that attracts foxes, a recipe from the Green Lotus sect. Nari quietly added that fox fat is needed for ointments. If Ada skins the fox, she asks that the fat be saved. Riel said she would go with Ada. On the western slope, they had seen tracks of creatures from the rifts, small ones, but Ada needed cover. Juhan listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't give orders. He just listened. 5 people. Each spoke of her own business, and for the first time, their affairs came together into a single picture. Ada hunts. Seha makes bait and collects fat for Nari. Nari makes ointments from the fat. Miyu takes furs to the market and brings back grain. Riel provides security. Juhan builds. This isn't a family. Not yet a family. It's a team, a work crew where everyone knows their role. But for now, a crew will do. He smiled. For the first time in 2 weeks, Miyu noticed, then she quickly looked away. 3 days later, Ada brought back 2 foxes. Seha brewed a potion from 4 herbs, and it worked perfectly. Ada said the foxes were drawn to the scent as if spellbound. It was the first time Ada had spoken to Seha directly, not through Juhan, not through Kyung-hee, directly. Seha shrugged and said it was a simple mixture. Ada said that whether it was simple or not, it worked. Something clicked between them. Not friendship, not warmth, professional respect. That's enough for now. Miyu went to the market with the furs, alone. Juhan wanted to go with her. Miyu said he'd better stay. At the market, a female vendor in plain clothes is invisible. A vendor with a man is someone's wife, and they're treated differently. She knows what she's doing. Juhan let her go, not because he wasn't worried. The first month was coming to an end when Nari laughed for the first time. It happened in the evening. Juhan was building a shelf for herbs in the drying room. He was working in the semi-darkness because daylight had already faded, and he considered it wasteful to use oil for a lamp just for the shelf. Nari came to check on the herbs hanging up. She saw Juhan in the dark, hammering a board and missing the nail. Once, twice, 3 times in a row. Then he dropped the hammer on his foot. He hissed quietly. He picked it up. Missed again. Nari snorted. Then she covered her mouth with her hand. Then she laughed. Quietly, briefly, as if the sound surprised her. Yuhan turned around. She was standing in the doorway of the drawing room, laughing and pressing her left hand to her mouth. Her right hand was in a splint. Her eyes were wet, but not from tears, from laughter. She said that the great head of the Lee clan couldn't hit a nail. Yuhan said that the great head of the Lee clan couldn't see in the dark like a cat, and that if someone had brought a lamp instead of standing there laughing, the shelf would already be finished. Nari brought a lamp. She set it on the floor. She stayed. They worked together. Yuhan hammered. Nari handed him the boards and pointed out where to place the dividers. This herb needs a dry spot. That one needs a damp one. This one can't stand being next to that one. She spoke calmly and confidently, like someone who knows their business. Yuhan listened and did as he was told. He didn't argue. He didn't offer his own suggestions. This was her territory. He was just the helping hands. When the shelf was ready, Nari hung the remaining herbs, each bundle in its place. Then she stepped back and looked. For a long time, quietly. Her face didn't change, but the thread between her and Yuhan flared up. It didn't just get brighter, it filled with a warm green light. For the first time since the ceremony, Yuhan felt it like a jolt in his chest, warm, not painful, as if someone had turned on the heat in a cold house and the pipes had started humming for the first time. The transfer had worked more powerfully than before. In the morning he woke up and knew 23 properties of local herbs. Not all of them, not an encyclopedia, 23 specific properties that were needed right now. Which herb reduces inflammation? Which one helps with frostbite? Which one speeds up the healing of cuts? Practical knowledge, a tool, not theory. This transfer was different. The previous ones had given him bits and pieces, knots from Riel, a drawing method from Nari, trivialities. This one provided a whole layer. Yuhan sat on the floor and organized what had appeared in his mind. The difference lay in the thread. When Nari laughed, the thread came alive. Not because Nari had made a breakthrough in her work, but because, for the first time in a long while, she was genuine. Not anxious, not frightened. Genuine. The system feeds on this, not on feats, not on breakthroughs, on the fact that the person next to you feels safe. Yuhan understood this, and he became afraid, because it meant he couldn't be cunning, couldn't rush things, couldn't pressure her. Each thread would light up only when the person on the other end was ready, not a second sooner. That very morning, Seha, silently, she set a cup of tea in front of him, hot, with herbs that smelled of something bitter and fresh at the same time. Yuhan looked at her. Seha wasn't smiling. Her face was stony. She said it was compensation for the dryer. The herbs were drying properly, and that saved her time. That's why the tea, not gratitude, calculation. Yuhan said thank you and drank it. The tea was excellent. Seha stood there and waited. He realized she was waiting for an evaluation, not praise, an evaluation, like a scientist waiting for a review. He said the bitterness was interesting, that he hadn't tried that combination before, that if she showed him which herbs she used, he would remember for the future. Seha looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she told him which ones. She listed 5 herbs and their proportions. Her voice was even, but she listed them. She didn't brush him off. She didn't say it was her business. She shared. The bridge grew a little wider. The spark toward Seha didn't ignite, but the color changed. From a cold blue, it became a little warmer, by a single shade. Mid-month, Yuhan took some charcoal and updated the plan on the wall. Next to the courtyard plan, a map of Miyu now hung. And next to the map, a new list appeared. What we have, what we need, what we can do. Roof, check. Well, check. Oven, check. Doors, check. Drying shed, check. Fence? No. Fix by the end of the month. Second oven for the outbuilding? No. Need stones? Gate? No. Need wood? Grain storage? No. Need boards? Road to the village? Washed out. Need stones and gravel. The list is long, not enough hands. But the list exists, and that's what matters. When you have a list, you can set priorities. When you have priorities, you can work. When you work, you don't think about how hopeless everything is. Ada did something unexpected that day. She walked up to Yuhan, silently. She held out 3 arrows, those very ones, from her home village. She said the tips had become dull. She asked if he could sharpen them. Yuhan took the arrows. He looked at them. 3 arrows with slightly curved fletching, handmade. The wood had darkened with age. The The tips were made of good steel, but yes, they were dull. He could have sharpened them in 5 minutes. Instead, he worked on them for half an hour, each tip separately, carefully, slowly, checking the sharpening angle. These weren't his arrows. They were the only thing Ara had left from her former life. Things like this aren't fixed quickly. Things like this are fixed with respect. Ara stood nearby and watched, silently. When he finished and handed the arrows back, she took them. She tested the sharpness with her finger. She nodded. She said one word, "Good," and she left. But she had come to him, not him to her. She gave him the most precious thing she had, asked him to take care of it, and he took care of it. The thread to Ara didn't flare up. The red tint remained, but the thread grew thicker, denser, like a rope to which another strand had been added. In the evening, Juhan sat on the roof, a habit. In Incheon, he used to eat on rooftops. Here, he thought on rooftops. Down below, a light burned in the ancestral hall. Smoke rose from the chimney. Beyond the estate walls lay a dark forest, and beyond that, mountains, and beyond them, a world that wanted to destroy them. Not now, not today, but soon. The headman of Peksan would not forget. The Auk clan would hear, and then people would come with swords, not with accounts. He thought about this calmly, not because he wasn't afraid. He was afraid. But for a builder, fear is just another burden to factor into the calculations. Their small clan's carrying capacity is still weak. 5 threads, 1 is burning, 4 are smoldering. 7 people, 1 axe, 1 sword, 1 bow, 0 money. The walls are old, the fence lies in ruins. It's not enough, it's laughably little. At the markets they laugh at them, but a month ago they didn't even have that. A month ago, there was a wet body on the cold floor, and 6 unfamiliar faces. Now there's a roof that doesn't leak, there's a stove that gives off heat, there's a well with water, there's a plan on the wall. There are 5 women who, this morning for the first time, sat down to breakfast, not in corners, but together at one table. Not because he ordered it, because there's only one table and the porridge is hot, and Miyu said it's silly to eat cold porridge on principle when hot porridge tastes better. No one argued. It's a small victory, but for 12 years, Jang Doyeon has been building big houses out of small victories. He knows how it works, brick by brick, plank by plank, person by person. He climbed down from the roof. He went to sleep. Tomorrow, he'll start on the fence. A fence is a perimeter. A perimeter is a boundary. A boundary tells the world, this is where ours begins. The Lee clan's first month was over. They were all still alive. That was a pretty good result. Juhan built the fence in 6 days, not out of planks. There were no planks. Out of stones he hauled from the riverbank, 20 trips a day. The stones were heavy, wet, slippery. His back gave out by evening. But a stone fence isn't a wooden one. A stone fence lasts for decades. Jang Doyeon built retaining walls on slopes after landslides and knew how to lay stone without mortar so that its own weight would hold the structure. The technique is called dry masonry. Stone to stone, flat side down, wide side in, each row offset. Riel carried stones alongside him, silently, without being told. She simply went out in the morning and walked to the river. On the 3rd day, Ada joined them. She didn't say a word. She picked up a stone. She carried it. Ada was faster than both of them. Skinny but sinewy. Mountain clan. They were used to stones. On the 5th day, the fence reached the gate. There was no gate. Juhan set up 2 posts and a crossbar. Then he looked at them and thought that this wasn't a gate. It was a statement. Whoever passes under the crossbar enters the territory of the Lee clan. The seal of the hearth had worked for the first time. He hadn't expected it. He simply placed the last stone in the fence and suddenly felt it. Warmth. Not in his body, in the earth. As if the estate had sighed, as if the house had recognized its boundaries. He stood there with dirty hands, looking at the fence, and realized that this fence was now a part of him. Not metaphorically. Literally. If someone climbed over the stones, he would feel it. If one of his own approached the fence from the inside, he would know who it was and from which side. Territory. His territory. No. Their territory. Kyung-hee stepped out onto the porch and stared at the fence for a long time. Then she said that in 30 years, no one had repaired the fence. Not a single head of the Lee clan. They were all warriors. Warriors don't build fences. Juhan replied that warriors are fools. Kyung-hee snorted. It was the first time she had smiled in his presence. Something else happened that same day. Nari came in the morning and said she wanted to try. Juhan didn't understand. Nari showed him her right hand. He'd removed the cast a week ago. The bone had healed. Crooked, but it had healed. Nari picked up a needle, a thin one, a medical one, for acupuncture. With her left hand, her hand didn't tremble. Nari placed the needle on the back of Kyung-hee's palm. The old woman sat still. Nari pressed down, precisely, confidently. Kyung-hee exhaled and said that the lower back pain that had tormented her for 3 months was gone. Nari lifted her head. Her eyes were wet, but her back was straight. She wasn't smiling. She was glowing, quietly, from within. The thread between her and Juhan burned with an even green flame. The vision he'd had that morning had given him an understanding of how the local system of chi channels in the human body worked. Not everything. The basics. Enough to understand why Kyung-hee was coughing. Stagnation in the upper meridian. He wasn't a doctor, but he now knew where to look. In the 6th week, Miyu returned from her second trip to the market, with 3 sacks of grain, with fabric, with news. The news was bad. At the market, she met a man from the Awk clan, not a soldier, a merchant. He asked about the Lee clan. How many people? Are there fighters? Are there walls? Miyu smiled at him and told him nonsense. She said that the Lee clan had 20 warriors and walls 3 men tall. The merchant didn't believe her, but he wrote it down. Miyu told Juhan that they had a month, maybe 2. Then they'll come to check. Juhan nodded. A month. He looked at the fence. Stone, waist high. Not a wall, not even a fence. A symbol. Against 30 mercenaries, this fence wouldn't last a minute. He needed more. More people. More hands. More of everything. That evening, for the first time, he sat down and drew not a plan of the courtyard, but a plan of the village. Pyeongchon. 10 empty houses surrounding the estate. Families of the Lee clan used to live here. Now the houses stand empty. The roofs have caved in, the walls are settling, but the foundations are solid, roads are visible, a stream flows from north to south, a forest to the west, a hill to the east. If only people lived in these 10 houses, if there were a family in every house, if every family worked, 10 houses, 50 people. This is no longer a manor, it's a settlement. Miyu walked over and looked at the blueprint. She asked where he would find people. Juhan said the people would come on their own. All that was needed was to repair the houses. Miyu looked at him as if he were crazy. She said that empty houses don't attract people. People go where it's safe and there's plenty to eat. Juhan replied that that was exactly why he would repair the houses, because a whole house with a roof and a stove is already an offer. A person wandering down the road in winter sees a whole house and knocks on the door. It works the same way in Incheon and in Haedong. Miyu was silent. Then she said that he was either a genius or an idiot, and that in a month it would become clear which of the two he was. Juhan said it's usually the latter. Miyu didn't smile, but something genuine flashed in her eyes. Not calculation, not habit, interest. The next morning, Juhan began repairing the first of the empty houses, the one closest to the estate. Small, 1 room. The roof had caved in. The walls were intact. The stove was destroyed. He worked alone, from morning until night. The roof, the stove, the door, the window, the floor. 4 days. On the 5th day, the house was ready. Small, clean, warm, empty. Juhan stood in the doorway and looked at the empty room. The seal of the hearth responded again. Warmth in the foundation. The house sighed. The house became part of the network. Now Juhan sensed 2 buildings, the estate and this house. 2 nodes, 2 heartbeats. 3 days later, a woman with 2 children was walking along the road to Pyeongchon. Skinny, clothes in tatters. The children were silent. That is how children who are used to hunger remain silent. Miyu saw them first from the lookout post that Ara had set up on the hill. Juhan went out to the gate. The woman stopped. She looked at him, at the fence, at the smoke from the chimney. She said her village had been burned down, that they were heading south, that if they could stay the night, they would leave in the morning. Yuhan showed her the house, small, clean, warm. He said they could stay the night, and tomorrow too, and the day after. If she wanted to stay, there was work. There was a roof over their heads. There was food, not much, but there was some. The woman looked at him and didn't understand. Then the children saw the smoke from the chimney and ran toward the house. She followed them. That evening, Nari examined the children. Exhaustion, colds, parasites. She treated them until midnight, calmly, confidently, with her left hand. She used her right as a support. She had adapted. Yuhan watched from the estate's window. The thread to Nari burned steadily. In the morning, he began repairing the second house. By the end of the second month, 23 people were living in Pyeongchang. The woman with the children stayed. She was followed by an old carpenter who had been kicked out of his workshop for his shaky hands. Then a family of 4 peasants. Their land had been taken by the Awk clan. Then 2 young men, former soldiers, deserters. One limped. The other was missing 3 fingers on his left hand. Juhan took everyone in. He told each of them the same thing. There's work. There will be a house. Food is scarce, but it's shared equally. I'll kick out the slackers. The old carpenter turned out to be a godsend. His hands were shaking, but his experience hadn't gone anywhere. He watched as Juhan set the rafters and shook his head. Then he walked over and silently demonstrated how to make a mortise and tenon joint. No nails. Wood into wood. Hold stronger than any nail. Juhan watched his hands and learned. The transfer didn't work on strangers, only on clan members. But Juhan knew how to learn even without the transfer. 12 years on a construction site meant 12 years of training. The old man's name was Pei Dong-soo. He was 62. He cried when he received his house. A small room with a stove and a door. He cried quietly, turning his back to the wall. Juhan pretended not to notice. There are things a man does with his back to the wall that another man doesn't watch. By the middle of the second month, 4 out of 10 houses had been rebuilt. Juhan worked with dongs and 2 former soldiers. The soldiers turned out to be capable. Their hands were used to hard labor. The lame man named Kang Hyun carried stones tirelessly. The fingerless Cho Min-jae proved surprisingly deft with an axe. Riel put them through their paces in the mornings. She trained them, not like soldiers, like militiamen. Basic stances, spear work, shield. Min-jae grumbled. Hyun-woo said nothing and just did it. A week later, 3 peasants joined them. Riel didn't praise them. She didn't scold them. She just showed them, over and over again, with a patience Juhan hadn't suspected she possessed. The thread connecting her to Riel finally changed color. From steel gray, it turned silvery, warm. Riel had found her place. Not a knight without a lord. A mentor without students who had finally gained students. Ara, meanwhile, went about her business. She left at dawn and returned in the evening. Game, hides, reconnaissance. She knew every trail within a 10-mile radius, every ravine, every stream. Once she returned with a map drawn on birch bark. She silently placed it before Juhan. A map of the area, accurate, detailed, with notes. A watering hole here, an animal trail here, a passage through the rocks here, a fault line here. No animals in sight yet, but there are tracks. Juhan hung the map next to the courtyard plan and Mia's map. 3 maps, 3 scales. The courtyard, trade, the terrain. He looked at them and saw the whole picture, like a master plan, like a development project. Only instead of high-rises, a village. Instead of contractors, 5 women and a handful of refugees. Instead of construction equipment, 1 axe and 1 sword. A different scale. The principle was the same. In the 7th week, the first real visitor arrived. Not the headman of Pekson, not a merchant, a warrior, a young one, about 25 years old, in fine armor, with 2 swords, 1 at his belt, 1 on his back. He rode up to the gate on horseback and asked who was in charge here. Yuhan came out, in work clothes, with clay on his hands. The warrior looked down at him. He introduced himself. Kwan Soban, junior master of the Hwan clan, envoy of Lord Hwan Taegyeon. Yuhan stood and listened. Kwan Soban spoke politely, but with a politeness that masked contempt. He delivered the invitation. Lord Hwan Taegyeon invites the head of the Lee clan to a meeting at Hwansong Fortress in 10 days. A refusal would be considered disrespectful. Juhan asked what the purpose of the meeting was. Kwan Soban smiled. He said that Lord Hwan wished to meet the man who had gathered the 5 hearthlands, because no one had done so in the last 200 years. Juhan nodded. He said he would think about it. Kwan Soban stopped smiling. He said that Lord Huang's invitation was not something to be pondered. It was something to which one simply said yes. Juhan said he would give his answer in a day. Kwan Soban turned his horse around and rode away. That evening, a council meeting. Everyone together. The ancestral hall. The stove is burning. 3 maps and a to-do list hang on the wall. Juhan said that the Huan clan is calling. Mi Yu spoke first. Huan Taegyeon, head of the Huan clan, the most influential of the great clans of the north, an army of 10,000, controls 4 provinces, intelligent, educated, dangerous, not the type to invite someone for tea without a reason. Seha said it was a trap, obviously. Riel said she would go with him. Ara said Riel wouldn't be enough, that Kwan Soban alone was worth 10 ordinary warriors, and that there would be thousands of them in Hwangsong Fortress. Kyung-hee was silent. Everyone waited for Juhan to speak. Juhan was thinking. In his past life, he'd had to go to meetings with clients who were stronger than him, major contractors, officials, people who could crush his guild with a single phone call. There was one rule: if they call you and you don't go, they decide you're afraid. If you're afraid, you're weak. If you're weak, you can be pushed around. If you go, they see you, they assess you, and sometimes they decide it's not worth the trouble to push you around. He said he would go, alone, without Riel, without weapons. Riel stood up. She said it was madness. Juhan said Riel was needed here, 23 people, a militia of 5 new recruits. If he leaves and takes the only fighter with him, the village will be left defenseless. Riel is needed in Pyeongchon. That's not up for discussion. Riel clenched her fists. She looked at him. There was something new in her eyes. Not anger, not resentment, fear. She was afraid for him. It was obvious. And she hated herself for that fear, because knights don't fear for anyone. Knights fear only dishonor. But Riel was afraid for Juhan and couldn't hide it. Juhan said he would return. He said it calmly, just as he used to tell his men in the guild when he left for negotiations. I'll be back. Get to work. Miu stood up. She said that if he was going alone without weapons, he would need a different kind of weapon. Information. In 2 days, she would gather everything she knew about the Huan clan. Lord Taegyeon's habits, his weaknesses, his pride, what he traded in, what he fears. Juhan nodded. Seha stood up. She said she would give him 3 vials, one with an antidote. The journey to Hwangsong Fortress took 3 days. Juhan walked. There were no horses in the Lee clan. He carried a bag of crackers on his back and Seha's 3 vials in his inner pocket. In his head, he went over the dossier Miu had compiled in 2 days. Huan Taegyeon, 45 years old, head of the Huan clan for 20 of those years. He came to power after his father died in the War of 1,000 Banners, not by inheritance, by force. His 2 older brothers also laid claim to the position. Both are dead. Officially, they died in battle. Unofficially, everyone knows that Taegyeon took them out himself. But he did it so cleanly that no one can prove it. He is educated. He reads poetry. He practices calligraphy. He collects antique swords. He maintains 3 martial arts schools. His personal chi technique is called Winter Crescent and, according to rumors, can cut through stone from a distance of 20 paces. Strong, intelligent, patient. Miu took special note of the last point. Patient. That means he won't attack until he's certain he'll win, but when he does attack, he leaves no chance. Hwangsong Fortress stood on a cliff above the river. Walls 4 men high. Granite, towers with archers, gates reinforced with steel. Juhan looked at the fortress through the eyes of a builder. The foundation is on bedrock, professional masonry, lime mortar. It will stand for 300 years without repair. But the drainage is set up incorrectly. Rainwater collects at the northwest corner. In 50 years, there will be a problem there. He caught himself on this thought and smiled inwardly. He was being led to a man who could kill him with a snap of his fingers, and he was assessing the drainage. Kwan Soban met him at the gate. He looked at his clothes, a work jacket, trousers caked in clay, boots, no weapons, no entourage, no gifts. Kwan Soban didn't say a word, but his face said it all. Contempt, surprise, and somewhere deep down, something resembling curiosity. They led him through 3 courtyards, each larger than the last. Soldiers, servants, artisans, horses, everything well maintained, everything functioning. Juhan watched and took note. Hwang Taegyeon is a good administrator. The fortress is not just a military base, it is a city, self-sufficient. like Pyeongchon, only 1,000 times larger and with a different philosophy. Pyeongchon was built from the bottom up, from the hearth and the well. Hwangsong was built from the top down, from the walls and the army. Two approaches, one question: which will stand longer? The reception hall, huge, high ceilings, carved columns, weapons on the walls, swords, spears, bows, banners of defeated clans, beautiful, impressive, and designed precisely to impress. Juhan recognized this tactic. In Incheon, wealthy clients received visitors in huge offices with panoramic windows. The meaning is the same. You are small, I am big. Remember that. Hwang Tae-gyeon sat in the center of the hall, alone, no entourage, no guards, not tall, sturdy, a handsome face, calm eyes, a genuine smile, not a show. He stood up when Juhan entered. He stood up. The clan leader who commands 10,000 men stood before a destitute hunter from the ruins. He bowed, not deeply, but respectfully. It was calculated. Everything in this hall was calculated, but the calculation was elegant. Taegyeon offered him a seat, offered tea. The tea was excellent, better than Seihi's. Juhan drank it and honestly said the tea was good. Taegyeon smiled. He said he was glad, that he brought it from the capital especially. Then he fell silent. He watched. He assessed. Juhan sat and drank tea. He didn't fidget. He didn't start the conversation first. 12 years of negotiations with contractors had taught him one thing. Whoever speaks first is the weaker one. Taegyeon spoke up. He said he was surprised. 5 hearthlands. In 200 years, no one had ever managed it. He asked why. Juhan said he hadn't gathered them. The clan had decided. He'd just happened to be in the right place. Taegyeon shook his head. He said that modesty looks like weakness in the poor. Better not to be modest. Juhan said he wasn't being modest. He was telling it like it is. Taegyeon was silent for a moment. Then he spoke plainly. No beating around the bush. The Lee clan has no future here. 5 destitute women and a handful of refugees in ruins. That's not a clan. It's a misunderstanding. The great clans of the north have decided to clean up the borderlands. It's settled. Smaller clans will either swear allegiance or disappear. He can offer an oath. The Lee clan will become a vassal of the Hwan clan. Protection, trade, status. In return, loyalty and a share of the harvest. Juhan listened. The offer was generous. By the standards of this world, even magnanimous. Taegyeon could have simply sent an army. Instead, he invited him for tea. Because the 5 hearthlands is a legal precedent, and overturning it by brute force is not profitable. It's easier to buy. Juhan thought for 3 minutes. Taegyeon waited, patient, just as Miyu had said. Juhan said no, quietly, without defiance. Just no. Taeyeon's expression didn't change. He asked why. Juhan said that the Lee clan couldn't swear allegiance. Not because they were proud, because that's how the system works. If the clan swears allegiance to another clan, the 5 hearth will fall apart. The seals only recognize a free alliance. It's true. He didn't know this until yesterday morning. The knowledge came through a transfer, from somewhere deep within the system, like a warning. Taeyeon narrowed his eyes. He looked at Juhan differently, more closely. Then he said it was interesting, that he hadn't known this rule, that perhaps Juhan himself hadn't known it a week ago, that the source of this knowledge raised questions. Juhan remained silent. Taeyeon leaned back, smiled, said he respected honesty, that he wouldn't press the issue now, but that the world is vast, but the borderlands are small, and that sooner or later the Lee clan would have to choose a side, or they would be chosen. Then he poured more tea, changed the subject, asked about the construction. He'd heard that Juhan was building, that he was repairing houses, that he'd put up a fence. He was curious. He himself had loved architecture in his youth. He had books in his library about the construction of the first court. Juhan froze. The first court. Taeyong uttered the word lightly, casually, as if by accident. But there was nothing accidental about this conversation. He knows, or suspects. Juhan finished his tea. He thanked him, stood up, bowed, exactly the way one bows to a client who has been turned down but with whom one wishes to maintain a relationship. Taeyong escorted him to the courtyard, personally, without guards. He stopped at the gate, looked Juhan in the eyes, said one sentence. "You're an interesting man, Lee Juhan. It's been a long time since I've met someone who would say no to me and not be afraid. Either you're a brave man, or you know something I don't. Both possibilities worry me." Juhan nodded. turned around, walked back down the road. 3 days to home. His back burned. He knew he was being watched. All the way to Pyeongchon, he thought of one thing. Taegyeon mentioned the first court. It's no coincidence. That means someone's already digging. Juhan returned to Pyeongchon at sunset on the third day. Riel was standing at the gate, in armor, with a sword. She hadn't slept for 3 days. You could tell by the look on her face. When Juhan passed under the gate lintel, she exhaled, long and deep, like someone who had held their breath for 3 days. She said nothing. She turned and walked away. A minute later, a crash came from her house. The armor fell to the floor. She slept until the following afternoon. Pyeongchon had changed during the 6 days he was away. The 5th house was ready. Dongs had finished it without him. It was crooked, not up to Juhan's standards, but it stood. The roof held. The stove worked. Juhan walked around the house. He found 12 flaws. He didn't mention them to Dongs. He fixed them himself in 2 hours. Dongzu stood nearby and watched. Then he nodded. He understood. Next time he'd do better. During that time, Ara caught a creature, a small one, from the fault line, the size of a dog, 6 legs, a shell, jaws. She killed it with 3 arrows, brought back the shell. Seha looked at the shell and said you could boil acid from it. A rare kind, expensive. The kind that dissolves rust and cleans metal. At the market, they give 2 sacks of grain for a vial of that acid. Miu heard this, and her eyes lit up with that same coppery fire. 2 sacks of grain for a vial. How many bottles from one shell? Seha said 3. Miu said that's 6 sacks of grain for a single creature. Ada said the western slope is full of creatures. 5 people looked at each other. Something clicked. Ada hunts the creatures. Seha brews acid from the shells. Miu sells it. Nadi treats the wounds from the hunt. Riel covers for Ada in the field. Juhan builds a workshop for Seha to brew acid safely. A chain, a closed loop. It works. Every link depends on the others. Every person is needed. This was the moment when the Lee clan stopped merely surviving and began to live. Juhan built the workshop in 4 days, a separate building, made of stone, with a ventilation hood, with shelves, with a workbench exactly at Seha's height. He had estimated her height by eye and adjusted the table so she wouldn't have to bend over. Seha entered the finished workshop. She stopped at the threshold. She scanned the room. Shelves, table, exhaust hood, a place for a fire, storage space. Everything was thought out. Everything was in its place. She walked over to the table, placed her hands on the surface. Perfect height. She wasn't bending over. She wasn't reaching. She stood straight. Her back was straight. Her hands were free. Seha stood like that for a minute. 2. Juhan waited by the door. Seha turned to him. There was no smile on her face, no mask, no wall. There was something raw and real. She said one sentence, "No one has ever built a workshop for me." Then she put on her work apron and began laying out her tools. The thread to Seha flared up. The cold blue turned into a deep violet, warm. The transfer that night gave Juhan an understanding of the basics of alchemy. Not recipes, principles, how substances interact, why some compounds are stable and others fall apart. It was like getting a chemistry textbook in a single night. Not the whole textbook, the first 3 chapters. But for a builder who works with mortars and materials, it was gold. In the morning, he mixed a new mortar for the masonry, 3 times stronger than the previous one. Seha looked at his mortar. She sniffed it. She asked what he had added. Juhan said ash and river sand in a specific ratio. Seha nodded. She said the principle was correct. Then she added a pinch of something from her pocket. The mortar became even stronger. They looked at each other. Seha said this wasn't gratitude, it was optimization. Juhan said that optimization suited him just fine. The 3rd month. Winter had loosened its grip. Snow still lay on the ground, but the sun was warm. The roads were drying out. There were 35 people in Pyeongchon. 6 out of 10 houses had been rebuilt. Miu had established a regular trade route. Once every 10 days to the market, acid from shells, Nari's ointments, dried herbs, back with grain, cloth, tools, iron. Each trip brought in more than the last because Miu knew how to trade, so that the sellers themselves didn't realize how they'd ended up at a loss. Nari opened an infirmary, a small room in one of the restored houses, a table, shelves with herbs, a cot for the sick. She treated the residents of Pyeongchon. Then people began coming from neighboring villages. Word spread that there was a healer in Pyeongchang, a real one. From a family of healers, Nari treated everyone with her left hand. She used her right hand for heavy work. She did the delicate work with her left. She adapted. She learned. She even became more precise than before, because every movement of her left hand was deliberate, not a habit, a decision. Once, a child was brought to her from a village 2 or 3 miles to the south, a 7-year-old boy, a fever, unconscious for 3 days. The local healer said it was hopeless. Nari worked on him for 4 hours, needles, herbs, decoctions, compresses. By evening, the fever had subsided. By morning, the boy opened his eyes. His mother was kneeling before Nari, crying. Nari helped her up. She said there was no need to kneel, that it was just work. Juhan stood in the doorway and watched. The thread to Nari was blazing, bright, green, hot. This woman with a crooked hand had just saved a child who had been written off. She hadn't just returned to work. She had become better than she was before, because for the first time, she was working not out of fear her worth, but because this was her calling, and she loved it. That night's experience gave Juhan a complete understanding of how the water supply system worked in settlements of this type, where to dig canals, how to distribute water, how to build settling ponds. He woke up in the morning with a complete irrigation plan for Pyeongchang in his head. It was necessary. Spring, planting season was coming soon. If the water was channeled correctly, they could sow twice as much land as planned. He began to sketch. Miyu came over. She looked. She asked how much it would cost. Juhan said it would take manpower and time. We have the materials, stone from the river, clay from the bank. We need people, 20 people for 10 days. Miyu said there weren't enough people. 35 residents, minus the children and the elderly, minus Nari in the infirmary, minus Ara out hunting, minus Seha in the workshop, minus Riel training with the militia, minus Juhan himself. 15 workers. That wouldn't be enough for 10 days of canal work. Juhan said it would be enough if they worked 12-hour days. Miyu said people aren't machines. Juhan was silent. Then he said she was right. So 15 people for 20 days. With breaks, with proper meals, with a schedule. Miyu nodded. Now that's reasonable. She'll draw up a schedule. She'll assign shifts. She'll make sure everyone gets their portion of porridge. Juhan looked at her. Miyu stood with her back straight and a copper fire in her eyes. She wasn't smiling. She was working. Her thread burned steadily and brightly. At the end of the 3rd month, what Juhan had been waiting for and fearing happened. At night, he woke up to a feeling, not a sound, a feeling. The seal of the hearth, the fence, the north side, someone foreign, 2 of them. He got up quietly, went out into the courtyard. The moon, cold, quiet. 2 silhouettes by the north wall, climbing over the stones. Not soldiers, scouts, light clothing, no armor, with knives. Juhan stood in the doorway and thought. 2 options, raise the alarm or go over himself. He went over himself, stopped 10 paces away, said it was a cold night and that if they'd come to look, he could show them himself. No need to climb over the fence. The scouts froze. Then one laughed, quietly. He said that Lord Hwan was right. The head of the Lee clan really is strange. They left, disappeared into the darkness. Juhan stood by the fence and watched them go. Hwan Taegyong had sent men to look, to check, to count. Now he knows how many people are in Pyeongchang. He knows there are no walls. He knows there is no army. The clock began to tick. The 4th month began with rain that fell for 9 days straight. The stream burst its banks. The southern part of the village was flooded. 2 rebuilt houses stood knee-deep in water. Juhan hadn't slept for 3 days. He was digging a drainage channel, by hand, waist-deep in mud. Hyun, Minje, and 8 other men from the village were digging nearby. Shovels broke. The earth shifted. The water rose. On the 2nd day, Juhan realized the channel wouldn't help. The water was coming from the mountains. The stream was too small for such a flow. We need a dam, a small one, a temporary one, but we need it now. He stood in the rain and sketched with a stick on the wet ground. Here the channel narrows. If we build a barrier out of stones and clay, we can redirect part of the flow into the ravine to the west. The ravine is empty, deep. It will hold. Donsu looked at the sketch, said we'd need 200 stones, at least. Juhan said he knew. The whole village hauled stones. Women, men, old people. The children carried one at a time. Nari came out of the infirmary and carried one too. With her left hand, she held her right hand pressed against her body. Juhan saw her and told her to go back to the infirmary. Nari said there was no one in the infirmary right now. Everyone is here, and she'll be here too. For the first time, she contradicted him, openly, calmly, without fear. On the 3rd day, the dam was ready. The water flowed into the ravine. The water level in the village began to drop. The houses had stood their ground. The walls were wet but intact. The stoves needed to be dried out. The floors needed to be replaced, but the houses were still standing. Juhan sat on the bank of the stream and looked at the dam. Rough, crooked, ugly, but it worked. The hearth seal accepted it too. Warmth in the stones. The dam became part of Pyeongchon. Now Juhan could sense 3 types of structures: residential houses, farm buildings, infrastructure. Each type had its own sound. The houses were warm. The outbuildings were functional. The dam was cold and stubborn, like Ara. He smiled at the thought. After the flood, 2 events occurred. First, a group of 12 people arrived in Pyeongchon. A family, 3 generations, grandfather, parents, children, grandchildren, from the clan that the Northerners had destroyed last winter. They saw the dam. From the road, they saw the whole village hauling stones in the rain. The grandfather said that in 60 years he had never seen a clan lord standing waist-deep in mud alongside his people. Usually, the lord sits in a dry hall and gives orders. Juhan said he had no dry hall. The grandfather laughed. He said that in that case, they would stay. The second event was worse. On the 5th day after the flood, a man arrived in Pyeongchon. One man, on horseback, richly dressed, with the Awk clan's seal on his chest. Not a warrior, an official. He introduced himself as the provincial tax collector. He said that Pyeongchon owed the Awk clan for the use of land and water. The amount? 50 taels of silver. By the end of the month. Juhan asked on what grounds. The official produced a scroll, a decree from the provincial governor. The land on which Pyeongchon stands formally belongs to the Awk clan from the moment the Lee clan lost its status. The Lee clan's new status was restored through the 5 hearth, but the land claims have not been revoked. Legally, the official was right. Mi-yu stood nearby and listened. Her face showed no emotion. When the official finished, Mi-yu asked to see the scroll. The official handed it over. Mi-yu read for a long time. Then she raised her head. She asked one thing. The decree was dated the 3rd month of last year. The land had been transferred to the Awk clan in the 3rd month of last year, but the Lee clan held the 5 hearth ceremony in the 1st month of this year. That means 10 months passed between the loss of the land and the restoration of their status. During those 10 months, the Awk clan should have registered the land in the provincial registry. Did they register it? The official fell silent. Mew smiled. Not the kind of smile that means nothing, a different one, a sharp one. She said she knew he hadn't registered it, because registration cost 200 taels, and the Awk clan skimped on the money for a formality. And without registration, the governor's decree is a wish, not a law. And a wish does not create grounds for collecting taxes. The official flushed. Miyu pulled a rolled-up sheet of paper from her sleeve, a copy of the provincial registry the province. She had bought it at the market a month ago, just in case, because Miyu always bought documents just in case. It was part of her craft, to know what was recorded and what wasn't. The official left, 50 taels lighter. Miyu stood at the gate and watched him go. The smile was gone. Her face was serious. She turned to Yuhan. She said it was a reconnaissance mission, not about the money. The money was just an excuse. The OK clan was checking to see if the Lee clan had someone who understood paperwork. Now they know they do. Next time they'll send a lawyer instead of an official, or a soldier instead of a lawyer. Yuhan nodded. That evening, he sat with Miyu over a map. For a long time. She explained. The OK clan. The middle ranked of the great clans of the north. Not as powerful as the Hwan, but close. Their lands begin 30 li to the north. 3,000 warriors. The provincial governor is their man. The court is their man. The registry is their man. Miyu bought a copy from a scribe who takes bribes, but next time the scribe might be ordered to rewrite the registry, and then Miyu's paper would be useless. Yuhan listened. Then he asked what she was proposing. Miyu was silent for a long time. Then she said something that sent a chill down Yuhan's spine. She said that Pyeongchon needed to be known not just here. It needed to be known far and wide. Because a small village can be wiped out quietly, but a village that people talk about cannot be wiped out. Rumors, reputation, that is a wall that cannot be pierced by a sword. She suggested selling Nari's ointments and Seha's acid, not at the nearest market, but at a distant one, 3 days' journey to the south. There is a major trading hub there, merchants from the 4 kingdoms. If their goods appear there, people far beyond the borderlands will hear of Pyeongchon. Nari, Seha, Miu. 3 threads working together. 3 crafts woven into a single strategy. Nari heals, Seha creates, Miu sells. And every sale is not just money. It is a voice, rumor, mention. Pyeongchon. You've heard. They make an ointment there that doesn't spoil for 6 months. They make an acid there that cleans steel until it's like new. There's a healer who cures children of fever in a single night. Juhan listened to Miu and saw in her what he saw in the best foreman on a construction site. A person who thinks not a day ahead, but a year ahead. The thread to Miu burned steadily. Copper. Warm. Calm. Miu no longer flickered. Miu had made up her mind. She isn't here, she has nowhere else to go. She's here because this is the best deal she's ever made. The next day, Yuhan woke up and knew how to calculate the logistics of a long-distance trade route. Shipping costs, optimal cargo weight, travel time, rest stops. He had never been a merchant, but the transfer from Miu had given him a merchant's mind. Not intuition, logic, the math of trade. He sat down and began to calculate. If Miu goes to the distant market once every 20 days, if she takes 2 porters with her, if she sells ointments for 3 taels a box and acid for 5 a bottle, then in 3 months, the Lee clan will have enough silver to buy iron for real tools, saws, hammers, nails, staples. With real tools, he can build twice as fast. Twice as fast means twice as many houses. Twice as many houses means twice as many people. Twice as many people means twice as many hands. A snowball, an avalanche, which starts with a single bottle of acid sold at the distant market. The end of the 4th month, 47 residents, 7 restored houses, a dam. The irrigation canal is half finished. The trade route is operational. The infirmary is accepting patients from 3 villages. A 12-man militia trains every day. All 5 threads are burning, not equally. The thread to Nari is the brightest and smoothest. The thread to Miu is the most stable. The thread to Seha is the deepest. The thread to Riel is the strongest. The thread to Ada is the quietest. But all 5 are burning. Juhan stood on the roof of the manor and looked at Pyeongchon. Smoke from 7 chimneys, light in the windows, voices, children's laughter, the sound of an axe. Somewhere, Donsu is cursing at a crookedly sawn board. Somewhere, Riel is commanding the militia. Somewhere, Seha is brewing another concoction, and the scent of herbs drifts on the wind. Somewhere, Nari is quietly talking to a patient. Somewhere, Ada sits silently on the watchtower and looks out at the road. Somewhere, Miu counts on her fingers and jots down numbers. Somewhere, Kyung-hee drinks tea and grumbles that the young people are too noisy. The pulse of the hearth throbbed, quietly, steadily, like a heartbeat. Every building, every beam, he felt them all. Pyeongchon was his body, and the people within it were his blood. Soon those who wanted to destroy it would come. He knew. Miu knew. Kyung-hee knew. Everyone knew. But tonight the evening is warm, and the porridge is hot, and the children are laughing, and 5 threads are burning, and that is enough. For today, that is enough. The 5th month brought the first warmth and the first blood. Ada found them in the morning, 3 bodies on the road, 2 li from Pyeongchon, merchants, small-time ones, heading south with cloth, killed during the night, clean, professional. Each had their throats slit in a single stroke. The goods were untouched. This wasn't a robbery, it was a message. Ada brought one thing from the bodies, a piece of cloth with an embroidered symbol, a circle with 3 blades inside. Miu turned pale when she saw it. She said it was the symbol of the wolf pack, mercenaries, the best in the borderlands. They're hired when people want a problem to disappear quietly. 3 dead merchants on the road to Pyeongchon is no accident. It's a warning. Some say the road to Pyeongchon is dangerous, that trading with the Lee clan is bad for your health. Miu said that if the caravans stop passing through Pyeongchon, trade will die within a month. No trade, no silver, no tools, No tools, no construction. One murder on the road and the whole chain breaks. Juhan called a council meeting. Evening, the ancestral hall. 7 people, 5 wives. Kyung-hee, himself. Riel said the road needs to be patrolled. Ada said that a patrol of 12 militiamen against the Wolfpack mercenaries is suicide. Seha said that they could mine the approaches. She has the compounds. Smoke, blinding, 1 incendiary. Mew said that mines on the trade route would mean the end of trade. No one would travel on a mined road. Silence. Everyone looked at Juhan. He thought. In his past life, there was a similar situation. A neighborhood in Incheon. A local gang was extorting small contractors. Those who didn't pay had their shacks set on fire and their tools stolen. Jang Doyeon didn't pay. Instead, he did 2 things. First, he hired security. Second, he teamed up with 4 other crews, and together they went to the police. The police won't listen to a single contractor. They'll listen to 5. There's no police here, but the principle is the same. You can intimidate 1 village. It costs more to intimidate 5 villages. In the morning, Juhan went to Baeksan, to the very village whose village head had come to demand tribute in the first month. The village head saw him and backed away. Juhan said he hadn't come to argue. He'd come to talk. He sat down on the threshold and told him about the dead merchants. He said that if the road became dangerous, it wouldn't just be Pyeongchon that suffered. Paeksan was on that road too, and the village beyond Paeksan as well, and the one further on. Mercenaries don't discriminate. Merchants don't discriminate. If the road is dangerous, it's dangerous for everyone. The village head listened. He frowned. He didn't like Juhan, but he wasn't a fool. Dead merchants on his road meant dead trade in his village too. Juhan proposed a simple solution: lookouts. Each village would post 2 people. 6 villages along the road, 12 lookouts, rotating every 3 days. If anyone spots danger, they light a fire on the hill. The others see it and are warned. Not an army, a neighborhood watch. The village elder thought about it for 2 days. Then he agreed. Not because he believed Juhan, but because the dead merchants lay just 2 li from his own house. A week later, the patrols were up and running. 6 villages, 12 bonfires on the hills, a network, rough, simple, but it covered the road for 20 li. The wolf pack tried again, at night. 2 mercenaries made their way to the road near Paeksan. A sentry from Paeksan lit a fire. Ada saw it from the watchtower. She called Riel. Riel, with 4 militiamen, went out to the road. The mercenaries saw the fires on 3 hills at once. They realized they'd been spotted. They retreated. They left, without a fight. Because mercenaries fight for money, and money isn't worth fighting a warned enemy for. After that night, the road was clear for a month. Trade resumed. Caravans set out. Mew went to the distant market with double the cargo and returned with a sack full of silver. Juhan bought tools, real ones, saws, hammers, chisels, nails, staples, twine, rope. Donsu took the new saw in his hands and stroked it like a child. Construction picked up speed. 3 houses in 2 weeks. The 10th house is ready. All 10 of Pyeongchon's original houses have been restored. Juhan stood on the hill and looked out at the village. Smoke from 10 chimneys, plus the manor, plus Sehi's workshop, plus the infirmary, plus the drying shed. 14 buildings, 62 residents, a fence, a dam, a well. Winter came early. The first snow fell at the beginning of the 9th month. Juhan wasn't caught off guard. He was prepared. For 2 weeks before the snow, he built a wall. Not a fence, a wall. A stone wall, 1.5 times a man's height, with a foundation 3 cubits thick, around the entire village of Pyeongchon, a perimeter of 600 paces. It was madness for a single builder, but Juhan wasn't alone. Donsu, Hyun-woo, Minjae, 12 militiamen, 20 men and women from the village, everyone who could hold a stone. The resonance of the 5 kicked in on the 2nd day of construction. All 5 wives were nearby, each busy with her own task. Nari was in the infirmary treating the builder's worn-out hands. Ara was on the watchtower keeping an eye on the road. Seha was in the workshop mixing the strengthening mortar for the masonry. Riel was commanding the teams of porters. Mew was keeping track of the stones and assigned shifts. 5 trades, 5 women, each in her place. A zone formed around Yuhan. He felt it as a rumble in his bones. His hands moved on their own, faster than possible, stone by stone, row by row, without fatigue, without pain. 3 hours passed like 30 minutes. When the zone collapsed, Yuhan stood before a 20-step-long section of wall, perfect masonry, even, solid, not a single gap. Donsu stared at it with his mouth agape. Then he looked at his hands. He looked at the wall. He said that in 40 years of carpentry work, he had never seen a man lay stone at such speed. Yuhan himself didn't fully understand what had happened, but he understood one thing. The resonance of the five isn't magic, it's synergy. When every element of the system operates at its maximum, the system yields more than the sum of its parts. An engineering principle. Only here it works through chi and threads and seals. The wall was completed in 12 days, not perfect, with openings for gates, with platforms for sentries on top, with narrow loopholes. Riel advised. She knew how defensive walls were constructed. Ara set up observation points. Seha laid the approaches to the wall. Miyu calculated the food and water supplies in case of a siege. 30 days. Pyeongchon wouldn't last more than 30 days. But 30 days is a long time. A very long time for a village that was in ruins just 6 months ago. Snow had fallen. White, silent, beautiful. Under the snow, Pyeongchon looked like a picture. Smoke from the chimneys, the wall gray against the white. Children were building snowmen by the well. Gyung-hee sat by the window drinking tea. Peace, silence, an illusion. On the 12th day of winter, a letter arrived. Not from the Ok clan, not from Hwangtae-gyeon. From the provincial capital, the governor's official seal. Juhan unrolled the scroll. Miyu stood nearby and read over his shoulder. A decree. The Lee clan is accused of illegal land appropriation, of harboring deserters, of trafficking in prohibited substances, of failing to pay taxes. A list of 12 charges, each one, on its own, a trifle. Together they formed the basis for a punitive expedition. Deadline. The Lee clan must appear in the provincial capital for trial, in 30 days. Failure to appear is tantamount to an admission of guilt. Miyu read it twice, then a third time. Then she sat down on the floor. She said quietly that this wasn't a trial. It was a verdict. A trial in the provincial capital is a trial of the Ok clan. The judge is their man. The witnesses are their people. The outcome is a foregone conclusion. If Juhan goes, they'll arrest him. If he doesn't go, they'll send the army. Juhan reread the decree. 12 points. 11 of them are lies. 1 is true. Deserters. Hyunwoo and Minjae, former soldiers of the Ok clan. They deserted a year ago. Formally, the Ok clan has the right to demand their extradition. Juhan folded the scroll. He looked at Miyu. He asked how much time they actually had. Miyu thought for a moment. She said less than 30 days. The decree took a week to arrive, so it was sent 20 days ago. The army would set out at the same time as the decree or a little later. 30 days for a trial was a formality. The army would be here in 10 days, maybe 15 if the snow delayed them. Juhan nodded. 10 days. That evening he gathered everyone, not the 7, everyone. 62 people in the ancestral hall, crowded, hot, children in their mother's arms, Donsu by the wall, Hyunwoo and Minjae by the door, 5 wives in the front row, Kyung-hee in the corner. Juhan stood before them. He told the truth, all of it, without sugarcoating. The army is coming. The Ok clan, according to Miyu's estimates, between 500 and 1,000 men, against 62, of whom 12 are militiamen with spears and 1 is a knight. He said that anyone who wants to leave can leave now, without shame, without judgment. He isn't holding anyone by force. Silence, a long one. Then the old man, Donsu, stood up. He said he was 62 years old and that he had already run away once when they kicked him out of the workshop. He wouldn't run away again. This was his home. Here was his saw. Here were the walls he had built with his own hands. He sat back down. Then Hyunwoo stood up. He said he was a deserter, that the army was coming for him, among others, that if necessary, he would go out himself and surrender so the others wouldn't be harmed. Riel said that if Hyunwoo went out, they would cut off his head on the spot, and the army would come in anyway. Surrendering wouldn't change anything. Hyunwoo sat down. Minjae, sitting next to him, silently gripped his axe with 3 fingers. A mother with 2 children, the very same one, the first refugee. She stood up. She said that for the first time in a year, her children were sleeping in a warm house, that she wouldn't go anywhere. One by one, an old man from the family that had arrived after the flood, a weaver who had settled there a month ago, a blacksmith who had come 2 weeks ago because he'd heard that craftsmen were valued in Pyeongchon. No one left. For 10 days, Juhan turned the village into a fortress. Not a military one, a living one. Every stone in its place, every person in theirs. Riel divided the militiamen into 4 groups of 3. Each group was responsible for its own section of the wall, not for fighting, for surveillance. If the enemy launched an assault, 12 militiamen wouldn't stop 500 soldiers. Riel knew that. Everyone knew that. But standing on the wall and seeing that you're not alone is already something. Ada scouted the approaches. 3 roads to Pyeongchon. The main northern one, the eastern one through the forest, the western one over the pass. The northern one is wide. The main column will take it. The eastern one is narrow. They can be slowed down there. The western one is steep, almost impassable in winter. Seha worked without sleep. 2 days in the workshop. Smoke charges, blinding powders, incendiary compounds, not weapons of mass destruction, tools for slowing them down, delays. Every hour the army spends approaching the walls is an hour in Pyeongchon's favor. Miyu left, quietly, at night, without explanation. Juhan woke up in the morning, and the threads told him that Miyu was far away, in the south, moving fast. He didn't understand why. Then he understood. Miyu went to trade, not in goods, information. She went to tell every merchant in every market that the Awk clan was coming to wipe out Pyeongchon, that the village that makes the best ointments and acid on the market would be destroyed, that trade ties would be severed. Miyu was creating a commotion, that very commotion she had spoken of, a wall that could not be pierced by a sword. Nari was preparing the infirmary. She expanded it, a second room, a third, bandages, ointments, splints, pain-relieving decoctions. She worked silently and with concentration. Her face was calm. Her hands were steady. Her left hand did the delicate work. Her right, the heavy lifting. She no longer hid her right hand. She wasn't ashamed of the crooked bone. Nari was preparing for the fact that there would be wounded, and she would treat them, because that was her job. On the 7th day, Miyu returned, exhausted, thin, but with fire in her eyes. She said she had done everything she could. 4 markets, 6 major merchants, 2 officials from the southern provinces. Everyone knows. The rumor has spread. If the Awk clan destroys Pyeongchon, it won't be a quiet sweep. It would be a scandal. It wouldn't stop the army, but it would have consequences. On the 9th day, Ara ran down from the watchtower. Dust on the northern road. A column. Juhan climbed the wall. He looked, far away, but visible. The Awk clan's banners. 3 columns. Infantry in the center. Cavalry on the flanks. He couldn't count them exactly, but Miyu was wrong. Not 500, not 1,000. About 300. Fewer than expected. But 300 professional soldiers against 62 civilians and 12 militiamen with spears is still a massacre. The army stopped just outside Pyeongchon. It set up camp. They were in no hurry. They knew there was nowhere to run. On the morning of the 10th day, a horseman with a white flag rode up to the gates. Not from the Awk clan. Another one. Expensive armor. A thoroughbred horse. A seal on his chest. Not a circle with 3 blades. A crescent moon. Hwan. Kwan Soban. The junior master of the Hwan clan. Juhan climbed down from the wall. He stepped outside the gates. Kwan Soban looked at him from the saddle, this time without contempt, with something resembling respect. He said he had brought a message from Lord Hwan Taegyeon, a personal one. He took out a scroll. Juhan unrolled it. The handwriting was beautiful. Calligraphy. Taegyeon had written it himself. The text was short. The Oak clan's army was acting without the sanction of the Council of Great Clans. This was high-handedness. Lord Hwan did not approve, but he was not interfering either, for now. However, if the Lee clan holds out for 3 days, and the Oak clan's army cannot take Pyeongchon within 3 days, this will set a legal precedent. A siege lasting longer than 3 days in the borderlands without the council's authorization is a violation of the 7-clan pact, and then Lord Hwan will be able to intervene, not out of kindness, out of self-interest, because if the Oak clan violates the pact, the Hwan clan will gain the right to take 2 provinces from the Oak clan. 3 days. Juhan reread it. 3 days. Hold out for 3 days against 300. Kwan Soban waited. Juhan rolled up the scroll. He said he understood. Kwan Soban nodded. He turned his horse around. He rode off. 5 people stood in the doorway. Nari, Ara, Seha, Riel, Miu, Kyung-hee behind them. Juhan looked at them. He said they had 3 days. Riel stood up straight. She said, 3 days. We can do it. Ara nodded. Seha was already calculating in her head how many charges she had left. Miu was estimating the water and food supplies for a 3-day siege. Nari silently went to the infirmary to prepare. Juhan turned toward the wall, toward his wall, the one he had built over 12 days. Every stone was laid by his own hands. Every joint was filled with his own mortar. The mark of the hearth pulsed within the stones. The wall knew him. He knew the wall. 3 days. He was a builder. He had built structures that withstood typhoons. 3 days was a typhoon. He just had to keep the roof from flying away. The first day of the siege began at dawn. The commander of the Awk clan's army rode up to the walls. A fat man in expensive armor with a plume of dyed feathers. He called himself General No Gi-son. His voice was loud. He was used to giving orders. He was used to being obeyed. He shouted that the Lee clan must open the gates and surrender. All the accused would be taken to the provincial capital for a fair trial. Property would be confiscated in favor of the Oak clan. The residents would be resettled in nearby villages. Resistance would be considered rebellion. The punishment for rebellion was death. Juhan stood on the wall, in a work jacket, with a piece of coal tucked behind his ear. The wind ruffled his hair. He looked at the general and saw not a military commander. He saw a foreman from a large construction site who was used to subcontractors cowering when he raised his voice. Juhan knew men like that. He had worked with them for 12 years. They are strong when people obey them. They are lost when they are told no. Juhan said the gates were closed. General No turned red. He repeated himself. Open the gates, immediately. Juhan said nothing. He turned around. He walked away from the wall. General No stood before the stone wall, the closed gates, and the silence. It was worse than an insult. It was indifference. The first assault began at noon. General No didn't beat around the bush. Infantry, 100 men with ladders, straight at the north wall, head on. He didn't expect resistance. A village, peasants, women and old people. Why be cunning? Why waste time on flanking maneuvers? Ladders up, soldiers over the wall. It'll all be over by evening. The ladders were set against the wall, 4 of them. The soldiers climbed up, quickly, confidently. They were used to taking villages. Ara was shooting from the eastern tower. Tower is a bit of an exaggeration. A platform on the wall with a wooden canopy to protect against arrows. Ara stood on that platform and shot, not to kill, at the hands, at the legs, at the shoulders. Every arrow was accurate. 3 students she'd trained over the past 6 months were shooting alongside her. Worse, much worse, but they were shooting. Every arrow that hit a shield or armor was an arrow that slowed them down. A soldier with an arrow in his shield climbed the stairs more slowly. A second, 2, those seconds were enough. Riel stood at the gate with 20 militiamen, not 12. Over the past 10 days, 8 more people had joined the militia. Men, women, old man Donsu, a mother with 2 children, had sent her 15-year-old eldest son. He stood in formation with a spear taller than he was, pale, but standing. Spears, shields, basic stance. Riel had trained them for 5 months and 10 days. Not warriors, a wall of people. Stand, hold, don't retreat, don't attack, just stand. The ladder on the wall is the entry point. 1 person at a time, 1 against 2 with spears, simple math. As long as the ladder is narrow, the defense has the advantage. Sesha lit the first charge. Smoke, thick, white, acrid. It covered the base of the north wall. The cloud rose 3 men high. The soldiers on the ladders were blinded. Their eyes burned. Their throats burned. Breathing was impossible. They started coughing. They stumbled. They retreated. Those at the bottom of the ladders ran back. The formation broke. Officers shouted, to no avail. When your eyes are burning, orders don't work. The first assault was repelled in 40 minutes. Not a single casualty on either side. Wounded. 2 militiamen with cuts from stray blows. A boy with a lacerated eyebrow. They bandaged him up, and he returned to the ranks. Nari said the cut wasn't deep. The enemy had about 15 men with arrow wounds. None were fatal. Ada had shot them that way on purpose. A dead enemy is a reason for revenge. A wounded enemy is a burden. The wounded must be carried, treated, fed. Every wounded soldier is a -2 healthy ones because 2 men have to carry him. Ada had calculated this earlier. Miyu had suggested it. The economics of war. General No watched from his tent and couldn't believe it. A village, a stone wall, a handful of peasants with spears, and his 100 trained soldiers retreated. He summoned the squad leaders. He yelled at them for half an hour. His voice echoed across the field. Juhan heard it from the wall. Not the words, the tone. A familiar tone. That's how the foreman yells when the crew misses their deadline. It doesn't help. It never helps. A second assault in the evening. Different tactics. General No isn't entirely a fool after all. 2 columns. One on the northern wall. A diversion. 50 men, making noise. Ladders, hooks, a feint. The other column. 100 men. A flanking move from the east. Through the forest. To the eastern wall where there's no platform and no archers. Quietly, quickly, at night. Ara spotted the flanking group an hour before they reached the wall. Not her personally, her scouts. 3 students in the forest, in the trees, motionless as owls. They saw the column, lit a fire at the agreed-upon spot. Ara saw it from the watchtower. She called Riel. Riel sent 10 militiamen to the eastern wall. Quietly, no panic. A redeployment. Like on a construction site when they move a crew from one section to another. Secha booby-trapped the eastern approach with 3 incendiary charges, buried them in the snow at the foot of the wall. Each charge was in a clay pot with a fuse. When the flanking group of 100 men emerged from the forest and moved toward the eastern wall, they walked confidently, quietly. They thought they were unnoticed. They came out into the open, 50 paces to the wall. Secha lit the fuses. The ground burst into flames. Not deadly, bright, hot, noisy. 3 pillars of fire. The snow around them melted instantly. The heat hit their faces. The officers' horses reared up. The formation broke. The soldiers scattered. Ara, from behind the wall, placed arrows at the feet of those in front. 3 arrows, 3 pairs of legs, screams. The flanking group retreated into the forest. They didn't run. They retreated in an orderly fashion. They were professionals, but professionals who had lost the element of surprise, and without surprise, a nighttime flanking maneuver is pointless. Meanwhile, the northern wall held off a diversionary attack. Riel didn't let a single soldier reach the ridge. Her sword glowed in the twilight, a sword of knightly lineage, a bluish glow along the blade. She was magnificent. Her father's armor fit her like a glove, not a single wasted movement. The sword traced arcs not to kill men, but to cut down ladders. She was chopping through the rungs, ropes, hooks. The ladder falls, the soldiers with it, alive, bruised, but alive. One soldier did manage to swing over the wall, young, quick. He rolled down the ridge. He stood up, sword in hand, his face twisted with rage. Hyun-woo stood before him, a lame former deserter with a spear. The soldier swung. Hyun-woo didn't back down. He took the blow on the spear shaft. The shaft cracked. The soldier swung again. Min-jae stood next to Hyun-woo, 3 fingers on his left hand, an axe in his right. The soldier looked at the 2 of them, one lame, one fingerless, both standing. Neither was running away. The soldier lowered his sword. He backed away. He climbed back over the wall. He left. Night. A respite. Nari was in the infirmary. 4 wounded militiamen. One was seriously injured. A spear had pierced his thigh while repelling an assault. Blood was gushing out. Nari worked for 3 hours. She clamped the artery. She cleaned the wound. She stitched it up. She applied Seihai ointment. She bandaged it. By dawn, the wounded man was conscious. The first thing he said was that he wanted to go back to the wall. Nari looked down at him. She said that if he stood up, she would break his other leg. It was the first joke Nari had ever made in front of others. Everyone who heard it laughed. 2 wounded men on neighboring cots. Nari's apprentice who had helped with the bandaging. A boy with a cut eyebrow who had come to check on the bandage. Everyone laughed, even the wounded man. Laughter in the infirmary in the midst of a siege. It was worth more than 10 smoke charges. Juhan hadn't slept. He walked along the wall. He checked the stones. Where the blows had weakened the masonry, he repaired it. At night, in the dark, with his hands, stone by stone, the mark of the hearth told him where it hurt. The wall spoke to him. Here, a crack from a hook's blow. Here, the mortar had sagged under the weight of a ladder. Here, a stone was loose. Here, water had seeped into the joint and would begin to erode it if not patched. He repaired it, just as he had repaired everything in his life: the roof after a typhoon, the wall after an earthquake, the prop after a landslide. A different scale, the same principle. Find where it hurts, fix it. Day 2, morning, gray, light snow, a north wind. General No pulled up the battering ram, a log 4 men could barely encircle, on wheels, iron shod at the tip, a canopy of wet hides on top to prevent it from catching fire, 20 men pushing, the target, the gate, the wall's only weak spot, wood, not stone. 3 blows from the battering ram and the gate would fly open. General No knew this. Yuhan knew it. Everyone knew it. The battering ram moved along the road toward Pyeongchon, slowly, heavily. The wheels creaked on the frozen ground. Miyu stood on the wall next to Yuhan. She looked at the battering ram. She asked what he was going to do. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched into fists. Juhan looked at the battering ram, then at the road, then at the mill. The old mill that stood by the road, the very one he had moved 200 paces east 3 weeks ago. Miyu had asked him why back then. He said the mill in its old spot obstructed the view from the watchtower. Miyu believed him. Miyu was wrong. For the first time in all the time Juhan had known her, Miyu had miscalculated. Because she had been thinking in terms of trade routes, not construction routes. Juhan hadn't moved the mill for the sake of the view. He moved it because at the new location, the mill stood right at the bend in the road. The only bend. The road ran straight from the northern field to the gates of Pyeongchang. Straight. Except for one spot, a bend around a rocky outcrop. Before, the road had gone around the mill on the right. Now the mill stood on the right. Stone, heavy, with a foundation that Juhan personally reinforced 3 weeks ago. He poured Sehi's mortar, which holds stronger than bedrock. A battering ram on wheels rolls down the road. The road turns. At the bend stands the mill, a rocky outcrop to the left. The mill to the right. Between them, a 4-step passage. The battering ram 5 feet wide. It won't fit. 20 men braced themselves against the mill. They tried to move it. The mill didn't budge. The foundation is dug 2 meters deep, reinforced with that very mortar. They tried to dismantle it. The stones wouldn't give. Sechi's mortar had turned the masonry into a monolith. They tried to go around it. A rock face to the left. A cliff down to the stream to the right. 3 meters down. The battering ram's wheels wouldn't fit. The battering ram got stuck on the turn. 20 men fiddled with it for 2 hours. Then they brought in another 20. 40 men tried to move the mill or take it apart. Ada shot at them from a distance. 200 paces. The limit for a standard bow, not for Ada. She shot an arrow into the foreman's shield. A minute or 2 later, into a soldier's boot, right between the toes. She didn't hit a single one, but the soldier sat down on the ground and stared at the arrow in his boot for a long time. Every arrow said the same thing. I can see you. I can hit whatever I want. Today I'm hitting shields and boots. Tomorrow I might change my mind. By evening, they abandoned the battering ram. General No stood by his tent and turned the color of a boiled beet. 2 days. 2 attempts at an assault. A flanking maneuver. A battering ram. Nothing worked. The village stood firm. A stone wall. Smoke bombs. An archer who hits the slit in a boot from 200 paces. A mill on the road. It was humiliating. A mill. A mill had stopped his army. On the evening of the 2nd day, Juhan stood on the wall and looked at the enemy camp. Campfires. 300 men. A murmur of voices. He saw the soldiers eating supper, cleaning their weapons, bandaging their wounds. Ordinary people, not monsters. Mercenaries and recruits who are paid for their work. Each has a family. Each has a home. He didn't want any of them to die. He is a builder, not a warrior. He builds houses, not graves. Ara stood beside him, silently. She looked at the camp. Then she said quietly, "Tomorrow they'll attack everyone. 300 men, ladders, hooks, ropes, from all sides, at the same time. 12 militiamen won't be able to cover a perimeter of 600 paces. She knows that. Juhan knows that. Everyone knows that." Juhan nodded. Ara paused. Then she said one more thing. She said that when they burned her village, she stood on a hill and watched. She couldn't do anything. She just stood there. She won't stand there anymore. If the walls fall tomorrow, she'll shoot until she runs out of arrows, then with a knife, then with her hands, then with her teeth. Yuhan looked at her delicate face, at her eyes in which it wasn't anger that burned, but something else. Determination, peace, a person who is no longer afraid because she has found something worth standing for. The thread to Ara, he looked. For the first time ever, the thread to Ara wasn't just bright, it was blazing, dark red, hot. Not anger, not rage, the fire of a hearth, that very fire that burns not to burn, but to warm. It was just that Ara warmed differently than the rest, through protection, through bow and arrow, through a willingness to stand between danger and those behind the wall. Yuhan thanked her. Ara didn't answer. She left. At dawn she would be in her tower, with a full quiver. The night before the third day, Yuhan didn't go to sleep. He sat in the middle of the village, with a piece of charcoal in his hand, drawing on the ground, by torchlight. Who goes where? Not military positions. Workers, everyone in their place, like on a construction site. The foreman assigns the crews, electricians to the left, plumbers to the right, concrete workers in the center. Everyone does their part. No one gets in the way of another. The overall result is greater than the sum of the parts. Dansu is at the western gate. He's a carpenter. He knows how to brace the structure. If a soldier sets a ladder against the wall, Dansu will brace the ladder from the inside with a long pole and secure it. The ladder stands, but the angle has changed. It's too vertical. It's impossible to climb. Hyun and Minjae are at the north gate. If they start breaking down the gate, they'll prop it up from the inside. Logs, stones, whatever they can find. The blacksmith is at the east wall. His name is Pan Chol. He arrived in Pyeongchon 2 months ago. A quiet man, strong. The bellows are puffed out. The iron staples are red hot. Each staple is tied to a rope. If a soldier grabs the wall's crest, the staple flies down the wall, red hot. Hands let go of the stone very quickly when it burns. Weaver Im Yuna with 3 women. Nets, fishing nets made of thick twine reinforced with rope. They drop the nets onto the ladders from above. The soldiers get tangled up. Their hands are occupied with the net, not their swords. A second of confusion. That's enough. A mother with 2 children. The children run from section to section, carrying water, bandages, arrows, bundles of incendiary herbs for Sehi. They aren't fighting. They're supplying. Miu in the central square. A map of the wall is spread out before her. There are dots on the map. Each dot is a section. Each section is assigned a number. Miu receives signals from the sentries on the wall and redirects the reserves. 3 people. That's the entire reserve. 3 people who run to where the fighting is heavy. Nari is in the infirmary. 2 students are with her. The table is clean. The instruments are laid out. The bandages are cut. The ointments are open. The decoctions are hot. She is ready. Kyung-hee is by the large cauldron in the courtyard. Porridge. Hot. Plenty. You fight on a full stomach. Every soldier knows this. Every builder knows this. The 78-year-old woman who survived 3 wars knows this. Every person, every skill, every pair of hands. Not an army, a village that works. Dawn of the 3rd day. Fog, cold, silence. Then drums. 300 men left the camp. 3 columns, north, east, west, simultaneously, from all sides. Ladders, hooks, ropes. General No put everything on the line. The final assault. If they don't take it in a day, disgrace, loss of face, the end of his career. That's why everything, all 300, 3 hours, the longest 3 hours of Juhan's life. Longer than that night in Incheon when a typhoon ripped the roof off an apartment building and 20 families sat in the basement while his crew installed a temporary roof in the pouring rain and wind. 3 hours of screams and crashing and smoke and blood. The north wall, the main assault. 150 men, 20 ladders. Riel at the crest, sword in hand, armor gleaming. She chops, she cuts, she strikes. Not people, ladders, hooks, ropes, anything clinging to the wall. 10 militiamen nearby, spears, A downward strike, parry. A downward strike, parry. A rhythm, monotonous, terrifying. Like working on an assembly line, only on an assembly line, they don't kill you. Donsu props up the ladder with a pole. The pole creaks. It holds. The ladder tilts. The soldier at the top loses his balance. He falls. A scream, a dull thud. The eastern wall. Blacksmith panchol. Brackets fly down, red hot. The soldiers pull their hands back. One didn't make it in time. He burned his palm. He fell from the ladder. Weaver Yuna throws a net, right onto the head of the sergeant who had swung over the ridge. The sergeant got tangled up. Minjae ran up. He struck him with the back of the axe, not the blade, the back. The sergeant fell unconscious, alive, with a bump on his head the size of a fist. The western wall, the weakest section. 8 militiamen. The wall is half a meter lower. It's tough here. Soldiers are climbing over. One makes it over. A second. The militiamen are retreating. Miju sees from the square. She shouts the section number. 3 reserve fighters run toward the western wall. They reach it. They fall into formation. They hold their ground. A minute. 2. The soldier who climbed over the wall looks back. He sees the village behind him. Houses. Smoke from the chimneys. Children's clothes on a line by the porch. A pot of porridge in the yard, and an old woman stirring it with a spoon. The old woman looks at him, not with horror, with weariness. The way one looks at rain that ruins the laundry. The soldier freezes, and he climbs back over the wall, outward. Ada has shot all her arrows, every last one. The quiver is empty. That very quiver, with a compartment for her 3 sacred arrows. She hasn't touched those 3 sacred arrows. They lay in the compartment, not for battle, for remembrance. All the others are in bodies, in shields, in stairboards, in the ground by the wall. Then Ada took a knife, a short one, a hunting knife. She stood by the loophole. She waited. If they climbed up, she was ready. She lit the last charge, the most powerful one. She'd been saving it for the finale. A pot the size of a head. Inside, a concoction she'd been brewing for 2 days without sleep. She threw it from the wall into the thick of the attackers. An explosion, not lethal. A flash of light, a blinding white flash. A roar, a wave of hot air. 40 men at the foot of the north wall crouched down, squinting. 5 seconds of blindness. 5 seconds in which Riel knocked down all the ladders on the north wall. All of them. One after another. Sword in her right hand, pushing with her left. 5 seconds. 4 ladders. Then the soldiers' vision returned, and before them was a bare wall without a single ladder. Riel stood on the crest, sword in hand. Her armor was covered in blood. Not her own. Not a single scratch. Riel's Nam sword broke at the end of the second hour. She slashed at the hook, and the blade of her father's sword cracked, the top third flying off the wall. Riel looked at the shard in her hand, her father's sword, the only thing left of the Nam clan. Broken. She didn't stop. She threw the shard away. She picked up the spear of a fallen militiaman. She fought with the spear. Then the spear shaft cracked. She picked up a shovel. She fought with the shovel. Miu stood in the square and shouted, not commands, numbers, out loud. How many retreated? How many remained? How many minutes had passed? First hour. 12 staircases repelled. 0 sections of the wall lost. 6 wounded. Second hour. 8 staircases repelled. A breach in the west. Closed. 4 more wounded. Third hour. The attack is weakening. 10 soldiers are pulling people back. General No is shouting. No one is listening to him. Her voice kept the rhythm. The people on the walls heard the numbers and understood that someone was counting. Someone knew. Someone saw the big picture. It held them together stronger than stone. Nari didn't leave the infirmary. 9 wounded in 3 hours. 2 in critical condition. 1 with a spear in his hip. The second with a shattered wrist from a falling rock. Nari worked non-stop. Her left hand for precision work. Her right hand for strength. Both hands together. It didn't matter which was crooked and which wasn't. Her hands did what needed to be done. Splint, tourniquet, needle, thread, ointment, bandage. Next, splint, tourniquet, needle, an assembly line. Only on this assembly line are lives saved. Kyung-hee stood at the gate with a bowl of rice in her hands, a 78-year-old woman, hunchbacked, with trembling hands. To everyone who ran past, she shoved a handful of porridge into their hands. Eat, work, don't die. A 15-year-old boy ran past, with arrows for Ada. Kyung-hee shoved porridge at him. He swallowed it on the run, ran on. Juhan stood in the center. With a piece of charcoal in his hand, he was drawing on the ground, wiping it away with his foot, drawing it again, rearranging people, reassigning them. Here, a breakthrough. Send Don-soo with the logs. Here, a new ladder. Throw a net over it. Here, carry the wounded man to Nari. Here, the blacksmith has run out of staples. Send a boy with a new batch. Here, Mi-yu has lost her voice. Send her some water. Not a commander, a foreman. On the largest and most terrifying construction site of his 2 lifetimes. As the 3rd hour draws to a close, horns, distant, from the north, a low, drawn-out sound. Not the Oak Clan's horns. The Oak Clan's horns are high-pitched and shrill. These are different, deep, confident. General No turned toward the north, dust on the road. Even in winter, cavalry kicks up dust even on frozen ground when there are 500 of them. Banners, a crescent moon against a black field. The Hwan Clan, Kwan Soban at the head of the column, upright, in armor, a sword at his back, 500 horsemen behind him. 3 days had passed. For 2 days after the siege of Juhan, he slept. For the first time in 6 days, his body shut down. Nari didn't wake him. She placed a jug of water and a bowl of porridge next to his bed. She covered him with a blanket. She left. He slept and had dreams, not about battle, about the construction site. Incheon, a typhoon, a downpour, the roof torn off, 20 families in the basement, his crew on the top floor, pulling plastic sheeting, hammering staples, the wind snatching it from their hands. Doyeon yelling at the guys, "Hold on, 1 more minute, just 1 more." He woke up on the 3rd day, got up. His body ached as if a truck had run him over. He went out into the yard. Light, sun, silence. No, not silence. Sounds. The thud of a hammer, the screech of a saw, voices, children's laughter. Pyeongchon was alive, as if the siege had never happened. No, not as if it hadn't happened, as if the siege had happened and passed, and life had gone on. Because life always goes on. That's why they build houses, so that life may go on. He walked around the wall, slowly, step by step. He touched the stones. Here was a crack from the battering ram that never quite reached its target. Here was a dent from a hook. Here was a soot stain from Sehi's charge. Here was blood, someone else's. He placed his palm on the stone. The seal of the hearth responded. Quietly, weakly. The wall ached. But it stood, like him, like all of them. For the first week after the siege, he repaired the wall, stone by stone, joint by joint. He replaced the knocked-out blocks. He patched the cracks. He reinforced the gate, a new gate, made of oak, with iron fittings. The blacksmith Pan Chol forged it for 3 days, a gate that no battering ram could knock down. Riel stood nearby as Juhan hung the new gate. In her hands was a fragment of her father's sword, the upper third of the blade. She had picked it up after the battle. She silently handed it to Juhan. She said she wanted to melt it into the gate, so that a part of the Nam clan remained in Pyeongchon, forever. Juhan looked at the fragment, at Riel's face, at her eyes, calm, clear, without pain. A knight who gives his sword to his home, not to his lord, to his home. The blacksmith forged the fragment into the gate's bolt. The iron of the Nam clan became part of Pyeongchong. Riel placed her palm on the gate, then withdrew it, nodded, turned around. She left to train the militia. A month after the siege, the snow began to melt. The roads turned to slush, but people walked along the slushy roads, through the mud, through the puddles. They were heading to Pyeongchon. The word spread, a village that had held out, not a fortress, not a castle with a garrison and mages, a village, peasants, a militia, an archer, a healer, an alchemist, a merchant, a knight with a shovel, and a builder who had moved the mill. People kept coming. By summer, 120 people lived in Pyeongchon. Juhan built. Every day, he'd get up in the morning, grab his tools, head to the site, new houses. Beyond the perimeter of the old village, the first expansion, 15 houses, then 20, then 30. Don-soo supervised the carpenters. He had 4 apprentices. His hands no longer trembled, or rather, they did. But the apprentices did the fine work while Don-soo taught. He demonstrated. He checked. He grumbled. Our old man carried himself. Not a retired carpenter, but a master with apprentices. There's a difference. By fall, 200 residents. By winter, 300. The second year, Pyeongchon grew like a living creature. not outward, inward. Every new house wasn't just walls and a roof. Every new house was a place for a specific person. A blacksmith needs a forge near water for tempering. A weaver needs a workshop with large windows for light. A potter needs a kiln and a drying area. Juhan built each one to suit its owner. Just like on the first day, when he made the table for Sehi to fit her height exactly. The mark of the hearth was imprinted on every building. The network grew, warm, alive, pulsing. Juhan felt Pyeongchon as if it were his own body. If a roof was leaking somewhere, he knew. If a wall was cracking somewhere, he felt it. If someone in some house was unwell, a thread would flicker anxiously, and he would go. Without asking, without waiting for a complaint, he just went and fixed it. Riel opened a school, not for militias, not for defense. She called it the School of the Wall. She taught them not to attack. She taught them to stand, to hold, to cover. 30 students, then 50, then 100. They came from ruined clans, knights without lords, soldiers without armies. Riel gave them a place, not orders, a place. Stand here, defend this. Here is your wall. Here are your people behind it. Everyone who came to her lost left with their head held high. One evening, Riel sat on the school porch, tired. No sword, no shovel either. She just sat there. Yuhan sat down beside her, silently. Riel said that her father had dreamed of the Nam clan serving a great cause, that her father had spent his whole life searching for a ruler worthy of the Nam sword and had not found one, that he had died without a purpose, that she had long thought that the purpose was the person you served, and then she realized that the purpose was the place you defended. Not a lord, a home. Yuhan nodded. Riel smiled for the first time in his presence. Briefly, quickly, like a flash. And she left. Ara would go into the mountains for weeks. She would return with maps, every trail, every pass, every ravine. She knew the borderlands better than anyone alive. 3 students went with her, then 6, then 12. Girls from the roads, orphans, refugees. Ara took them in silently, taught them silently, to shoot, to track, to read tracks, to survive. Once, one of the students asked why Ara kept 3 old arrows in a separate compartment of her quiver. Ara answered, one word, home. The student didn't ask again. Secha. The laboratory had grown into a complex of 3 buildings. Ointments, acids, medicines, powders, formulas not found in any pharmacopoeia in the world. Seha experimented every day. 2 students, then 5, then 10. She taught harshly, demandingly, but fairly, and the first thing she asked every student was this: are you here for recipes or for understanding? If it's for the recipes, the door is over there. If it's for understanding, sit down. The Green Lotus sect sent a letter, a long one, a polite one, with a request for cooperation. Between the lines it read, we were wrong, come back. Seha read it, tore it up, threw it in the oven, turned to Juhan, who had come in to check the exhaust fan, said she had her own sect now, with an exhaust fan built by a normal person, not elders who skimp on ventilation. The thread to Seha glowed purple, deep, warm. Seha no longer put up walls. Seha was home. Mew. By the end of the 2nd year, Mew ran a trading network of 40 merchants. Pyeongchon's goods were sold in 5 kingdoms. Nari's ointments, Seha's concoctions, a blacksmith's tools, a weaver's fabrics, grain from the fields. Every product carried a name, Pyeongchong. That name came to carry more weight than the seal of any other clan. Miyu didn't trade for money. She'd had enough money for a long time. Miyu was building a network, connections, dependencies. Every merchant who traded with Pyeongchon became part of a system that needed Pyeongchon. To remove Pyeongchon meant to bring down 40 trade routes. It was a defense stronger than a wall. One evening, after a long day, Miyu sat alone in the trading house, tired. The candles were burning down. Juhan walked in, silently. He placed a cup of tea in front of her, sat down beside her, silently, just like back then, in the first month, when he realized he didn't need to say anything to her. Miyu took the cup, took a sip, then set it down, looked at Juhan. She said quietly, "Do you know when I last cried?" Juhan shook his head. Miyu said it was when her father gambled away the trading house. She stood in the doorway of the empty house and cried. She was 14. She hadn't cried once since then. 6 years. Because tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. A merchant doesn't cry. A merchant smiles. Then she fell silent. Then she cried. Quietly. Soundlessly. Tears rolled down her cheeks and she wasn't smiling. For the first time in 6 years, Juhan didn't hug her, didn't comfort her, didn't say everything would be all right. He just sat beside her. And the thread between them burned so brightly that he could almost see it physically. Copper, warm, real, Nari. The infirmary had grown into a hospital. 3 rooms, 20 beds, 8 students. Nari treated everyone, without distinction. They brought patients to her from as far as 200 li away. She never turned anyone away. Never. Her right hand worked. The leather patch that Yuhan had made on the first day was worn, patched, and thin to the point where the thread was visible. She didn't take it off. He offered to make a new one. Nari refused. She said this one was good. This first one. This one he had made when he didn't yet know her name. One night, Nari sat alone in the infirmary alone. The last patient had fallen asleep. She sat at the table and looked at her hands. The left one, the right one, both. Yuhan walked in, quietly. Nari looked up. Her eyes were dry, calm. She said that 2 years ago she believed a broken arm was the end, that her worth was over, that she was a burden, that Yuhan had taken her out of pity. Then she paused. She said that now she knows a broken arm isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because when your usual support breaks, you have to find a new one. And the new one sometimes turns out to be stronger. Yuhan listened. The thread to Nari glowed with an even green light, the brightest of the 5, the warmest, the very first. In the 2nd year, Hwang Taegyeon arrived, in person, without an army, riding a plain, unadorned horse, with only Kwan Soban. He rode through the gates of Pyeongchon, the new gates with the Nam clan's iron seal in the bolt. He was silent for a long time. He dismounted. He stood in the middle of the square. He looked. Houses, workshops, a school from which voices could be heard, a smithy, the laboratory, the hospital, the row of shops, children, old people, men and women going about their business, not turning to look at the man bearing the great clan's seal. Because in Pyeongchon, they were used to seals. People came here from everywhere. Juhan came out to meet him, in a work jacket, his hands in clay, as always. Taegyeon looked at him, for a long time, without a smile. Then he said he had come to understand. One word. How? They sat in the Hall of Ancestors. On the wall hung a close-up of the courtyard, that very one, in charcoal, crooked. Next to it, a map of Mu, a map of Ada, a to-do list. The list had spread across 3 walls and part of the ceiling. Miyu had said they needed a separate room for the lists. Juhan had refused. He said the list had to hang here, in plain sight, so everyone could see how much had been done and how much remained. Taegyeon looked at the lists, at the drawings, at the notes, at the arrows connecting one point to another. Then he looked at Juhan, said that in 20 years of rule, he had built an army of 10,000. Fortresses, provinces, trade routes, a tax system, intelligence, everything, but not once had he built a place where people went of their own accord. His fortresses were held together by debt, his provinces by force, his trade by control. Everything worked, but everything required constant pressure. Take away the pressure, and the system would crumble. Pyeongchon works without pressure. People come of their own accord. They work on their own. They defend it themselves. He wants to understand what holds it together. Juhan was silent. He drank tea. He thought. Then he said one thing. When you build a wall, don't think about the wall. Think about the person who will live behind it. Taegyeon frowned. He asked what that meant in practice. Juhan said that in practice, it meant that every desk in Pyeongchon is adjusted to the height of the person working at it. Every shelf is at a height that the person using it can reach. Every door opens in the direction that is most convenient for the person walking through it. Little things, imperceptible, but a person who lives in a house built for them, not for the sake of reporting, feels differently. They feel seen. Taegyeon was silent for a long time, a very long time. Then he raised his cup, drank, stood up, bowed, deeply. Not like a lord to a peasant, not like an equal to an equal, like a student to a master. He said he would return, with the masons, with materials, not as a handout, as an investment, because a world with Pyeongchon is more profitable than a world without it. He left. 3 years later, Pyeongchon ceased to be a village. Pyeongchon became a city, 5,000 residents. The Ochaga school, not a school of war, not a school of magic, not a school of politics, a school of craftsmanship. They taught building, healing, cooking, trading, farming, defending. Students from the 6 kingdoms, sons of lords and daughters of peasants, at the same table, at the same workbench, with one hammer for two, because a wall doesn't ask who's building it. A wall either stands or falls. The secret of the first court was revealed. Kyung-hee died at the end of the 2nd year, quietly, in her sleep, in the morning, with a cup of tea in her hand. The cup hadn't spilled. It stood on the table next to her palm, as if she had carefully set the cup down, then lay down, fell asleep, and never woke up. Nari found her. She sat there for a long time. She didn't cry. She held her hand. It was cold. Then she went out and quietly told Juhan. Juhan stood in the doorway of Kyung-hee's room and looked at the old woman. A 78-year-old woman who had seen a stranger's soul in her grandson's body on the 3rd day. She said nothing. She accepted it, because the roof has been repaired, and that is enough. He bowed to her, deeply, to the floor, as he had never bowed to anyone, neither in this life nor in the last. A scroll was found on Kyung-hee's table, old, worn. The paper was crumbling at the edges. The history of the Lee clan, the real one, not the one in the chronicles. The Lee clan are direct descendants of the first court, the dynasty that united the continent of Haedon 1,000 years ago, not with an army, not with magic, with craftsmanship, with construction, with trade, with healing. They built roads and bridges and cities and hospitals and schools, and the 7 current kingdoms grow upon their bones, upon their memory, erased from history, because the legitimacy of the 7 kingdoms rests on the fact that the first court never existed. The scroll found to Mew. Mew read it, silently, for a long time. Then she looked at Juhan. She asked what to do. Juhan said it was up to her. She is a merchant. She knows how information works. Mew did not hide the scroll. Mew copied it. 20 copies. 30. 50. She sent them out. To every library in every kingdom. To every chronicler. To every scholar. To every temple. To every merchant who knew the name of Pyeongchon. A secret cannot be killed if it ceases to be a secret. Seha helped. She made a formula for ink that doesn't fade or wash away. Nari authenticated every copy with the seal of Pyeongchon Hospital. Ara personally delivered 10 copies to the most remote temples via mountain trails known only to her. Riel stood at the gate and waited for those who would come with swords to destroy the truth. 5 women, 1 secret, 1 answer. 3 powers declared a hunt for Juhan, officially, with seals, with a reward. A week later, they called it off, because killing a man known across the entire continent is not a hunt, it is war. And to wage war against Pyeongchang is to wage war against 40 trade routes and 5,000 inhabitants, and the continent's finest physician, and the only alchemist whose ointment remains fresh for 6 months, and the only trade network that operates across all 7 borders. No one is willing to pay such a price for the truth about a dynasty that lived 1,000 years ago. On the first day of the 3rd spring, a young man arrived at the gates of Pyeongchon, on foot, alone, dressed in the simple clothes of a pilgrim, a gray cloak, worn-out boots, no entourage, no weapons, no banner. The guard at the gate stopped him, asked who he was and why he was there. The young man said he had come to study. The guard let him through. People who wanted to study came to Pyeongchon every day. Nothing unusual. Miyu recognized him in the square. She stopped, turned pale, then pulled herself together. She approached Juhan, who was nailing a shutter onto a new house. She whispered a single word, Prince, the crown prince of the Soraeon Empire, 20 years old, 3rd in line to the throne, but according to rumors, the only one of the brothers with a level head. His eyes were tired, his face was gaunt, his back was straight. He walked through Pyeongchon and looked around, not like a lord inspecting his domain, like a man seeing for the first time what he had heard about for 3 years. Past the school, the voices of students behind the wall, the sound of hammers, the smell of fresh wood. Past the hospital. Nari is talking to a patient on the porch, quietly, patiently. The patient nods and smiles. Past the blacksmith shop, Panchol at the forge, sparks, the clang of metal, heat. Past the laboratory, the smell of herbs and something bitter and fresh. Seha is visible through the window. She is bent over a mortar. A student nearby takes notes. Past the houses, smoke from the chimneys, laundry on the lines, children playing by the well. Old man Donsu sits on a bench and scolds the student who has unevenly planed a board. Past the wall, stones, those very ones, with dents from hooks, with Juhan's patches, with traces of soot, the wall that held for 3 days. The prince stopped by the wall. He placed his palm on the stone. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked on. He reached the ancestral hall. He went inside. Juhan was sitting on the floor inside, repairing a table leg, an ordinary wooden leg. The fastening had come loose. The table was wobbling. Nari complained that when she laid out her tools on the table for lessons, the table wobbled and the students got distracted. Juhan was tightening the fastener with a screwdriver that Pan Chol had forged specifically for small jobs. The prince stopped in the doorway. He watched. The head of the Li clan, the man before whom an army had retreated, the man who had built a city from ruins, the heir to the first court, the family hearth artifact, the subject of discussion at every council of every kingdom for 3 years running, sitting on the floor and repairing a table leg because the table wobbles. The prince dropped to his knees. He stated his full title, his name, his title. Then he said that for 3 years he had heard about Pyeongchon, that every report from his spies said the same thing. Impossible. A village cannot become a city in 3 years. Peasants cannot repel an army. A builder cannot change the world. Impossible. But Pyeongchon stands, and he came on foot from the imperial capital, alone, without an army and without a crown, to understand how to build something that cannot be destroyed. Juhan listened. Without raising his head, the fitting was stubborn. The wood had swollen from the moisture. He needed to slightly file down the groove. When the prince finished, Juhan raised his head. He looked at him, young, tired, sincere. He reminded me of those apprentices who used to come to the construction site in Incheon, green, with eyes ablaze, not knowing which end of the hammer to hold, but ready to learn. Juhan said that if the prince had come to learn, he should hold the table. Otherwise, the leg wouldn't stay in place. Someone needed to hold the tabletop while he tightened the fastener from below. The prince got up from his knees. He walked over. He grabbed the table. He held it firmly. Juhan tightened the fastener. He checked. It didn't wobble. Good. He stood up, wiped his hands on his jacket, held out his hand to the prince. Not a bow from the clan chief to the heir to the empire. Not a ceremony. A handshake, like between 2 men who had just fixed a table. The prince looked at the outstretched hand, at the rough palm with scars and calluses, shook it, firmly. For the first time that day, his eyes came alive. By evening, all of Pyeongchon knew the prince was in town. Miyu wanted to throw a reception. Juhan refused. He said the prince had come to study, not to dine. He seated him at the communal table, porridge with meat, a bowl, a spoon. Next to him was Dongsu, who didn't know who this skinny, and so grumbled at him for eating too slowly. Next to him was the young messenger from the siege. Now 16, he was a blacksmith's apprentice. Next to him was the weaver Yuna. Next to her, a mother with 2 children. The children have grown up. The older one works at the school. The younger one helps Nari at the hospital. The prince ate porridge, ordinary porridge, at the communal table, among people who didn't know his name and didn't care. Because in Pyeongchon, it's not who you are that matters, but what you can do. Late evening, Juhan is on the roof, a habit. 12 years in Incheon, 3 years in Pyeongchon. The rooftops haven't changed. The city below, 5,000 lights, 5,000 breaths, 5,000 stories. He remembers every house, every stone, every beam, every crack he's patched, every roof he's rethatched, every stove he's built. Strings shimmered in the darkness, 5 bright ones, thousands of thin ones, a living web, the city body, his body, their body. Quiet footsteps nearby. Nari. She climbed the stairs, the very ones Juhan had built during his first month here. The stairs creaked. They'll need to be repaired, tomorrow. Nari sat down beside him, silently. She held out her hand, her right one, with a leather patch, worn, patched, the first one. Juhan took it. Her palm was warm, alive, a crooked bone beneath the skin. He didn't need to look to know. He remembered. 3 years ago, he held that hand for the first time, on the floor of the ruined ancestral hall, under a leaking roof, with 6 frightened women present. He didn't know her name then, didn't know where he was, didn't know why. He just took the hand that hurt and did what he could. Nari rested her head on his shoulder, quietly, gently, as if she'd done it 1,000 times. For the first time in 3 years. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. A thread between them glowed, quietly, steadily, green, warm, like the light in the window of the house you return to at night. always on. Down the street, Ara passed by, bow on her back, a quiver with 3 arrows in a separate compartment, 12 students behind her, silent, quick, shadows, night patrol, every night, 3 years without a break. Ara hadn't missed a single one, because if she let her guard down even for a night, they might come and burn it down. But now it wasn't panic, it was duty. Seha came out of the lab. She stretched, cracked her neck, looked at the stars, tired, a good kind of tired, from work you love, that you do because you want to, not because you have to. Behind her, a light was on in the window. The apprentice at the table was finishing his notes. Seha turned around, told him that was enough for today and to go to bed. The apprentice nodded, didn't go to bed, finished writing. Seha shook her head, just like she herself had been 20 years ago, smiled, a genuine smile, went home. Riel was standing at the gate, in her father's armor, altered, tailored, with a bolt into which a fragment of the Nam clan's sword had been fused. She placed her palm on the gate, a habit, every evening, like a ritual. Nearby, 24 students from the School of the Wall, standing at attention, looking ahead, unafraid. Behind them, home, nothing to fear. Miu sat in the trading house. The candles were burning down. Before her, a stack of letters, from merchants, from officials, from clan leaders. Every letter began the same way. Dear Lee Clan. 3 years ago, no one knew that name. Now it was written on paper with respect and seals. Miu set the letters aside. She blew out the candle. She stood up. She stepped out onto the porch. She looked up at the sky. She didn't smile. She didn't count. She just stood there and breathed. The night air, the air of the city she had helped build. By the well in the square sat the crown prince of the Sarayon Empire, alone, with an empty porridge bowl on his lap. He gazed at the stars. He listened to the silence, a silence in which 5,000 people slept peacefully because they knew what tomorrow would bring. There would be a roof, there would be porridge, there would be work, there would be a home. Jang Doyeon, a foreman from Incheon, sat on the roof and held the hand of a woman who, 3 years ago, had been afraid to look up. He didn't know how to lead an army. He didn't know how to weave intrigues. He didn't know how to fight with swords or direct chi along the 12 meridians.